Hey, I didn't bring my mouse with me, so I'm trying to get the overlay off. All right.
Hedda Hopper speaking. I'm talking from the bedroom of Norma Desmond. Don't bother with a rewrite, man. Take this directly. Ready? As day breaks over the murder house.
Yes, you'll read the big black headlines about Norma Desmond and this Hollywood scandal. You'll never read the true story about the rest of us who were part of it. Me, for instance, Joe Gillis, a promising young writer from Dayton, Ohio. And Betty, that nice kid I met at a Hollywood party, who knew nothing about me, but knew what she wanted. Don't you love Artie?
Of course I love him. I always will. I'm just not in love with him anymore.
What happened? Well, to live happily ever after, like they do in the movies. But this was different. Because this is a Hollywood story about the people who make the movies. The little ones that you never hear of, like Betty and me. The great ones, like Cecil B. DeMille. All those who knew Norma Desmond. A strange woman who left her mark on all of us who crossed her path. Has it ever occurred to you that I may have a life of my own? That there may be some girl that I'm crazy about?
Oh, some car for a dress extra?
What I'm trying to say is that I'm all wrong for you. You want a Valentino, somebody with polo ponies, a big shot.
What you're trying to say is you don't want me to love you. Say it. Say it.
Gloria Swanson, one of the great personalities of this generation in a role that comes to an actress once in a lifetime. Rising to the heights, William Holden creates a startling portrayal. And a new star is born in Sunset Boulevard, Miss Nancy Olson.
Joe? Where are you? What's this all about?
Why don't you come out and see for yourself? The address is 10,086 Sunset Boulevard.
Yes, come out to see for yourself the film that reaches a new milestone of dramatic daring. The film that every critic says is a giant among motion pictures.
Okay, you're watching Movie Night Extravaganza. I'm here, as always, with my fun-loving co-host, J. Andrew World, with
Howdy.
Matthew the Film Guy of Majority Report fame, and editor of the movie Black Bear, and, of course, Langdon Boom on Letterboxd. Yep.
No but that's fine.
Matthew Film Guy, you're right. I messed that up last time.
Get it right. That's the name my mother gave me.
Matthew T. Film Guy. All
That
right.
stands for Tiberius, but go on.
I'm also here with Conan Neutron of Protonic Reversal Podcast, Conan Neutron and the Secret Friends, and Conan Neutron on Letterboxd. Big,
right.
big.
You're not
big
the only one on
Letterboxd
Letterboxd anymore, Langdon Boom. Come on.
By far.
And of course, from the chat and also the podcast, Jay Hutch Talks Too Much. Jay Hutch, how are you doing?
Doing well. Thanks for having me. I was going to say I can't help but feel that the live chat section is going to suffer considerably tonight.
Well, there's nobody. We're at 0 people watching live right now.
Oh no, you got your one audience member here.
Our one.
That's what happens when you draft
audience.
the MVP of the chat.
So, have all of you guys seen this movie multiple times, or is this anyone's first time watching it?
Second time.
This is my first time, but I, in my defense, I have watched a lot of Tiny Toons and Animaniacs, so I felt like I've seen this before.
So I'm aware of the references, so that's pretty much the same thing, right?
Paramount, I've heard of that.
They make Star Trek.
I've told people I was ready for my close-up, Mr. DeMille, 100 times. So does that count?
I'm ready for my close-up, Mr. Cedar.
I didn't get any close-ups from him. No way. Wide shots in the background. That's it.
All right. Well, that's like half this movie. I feel like I feel like this movie kind of pioneered the cameo the way that we see it now. Obviously, cameos have always been part of cinema, for as long as there has been cinema. Like they'll put people in from different movies, and studios will try to promote things by giving actors jobs as extras, or like all these different forms of cameos. But I feel like the cameos in this movie are very sophisticated because they're placed very purposely to like call back this nostalgia for silent movie filmmaking in a way that right now I think is fascinating, because I feel like cinema is kind of pushed into quadrants almost, where silent movies and black and white movies are seen for a lot of people as almost like the same thing. But there's that talky line, like not, but like what I mean. Like a lot of people, I feel like push that history down into like kind of that's the black and white era and this is the color era, or like those are old movies or those are classic movies and these are new movies. And I feel like this movie is kind of its own, because it's coming while the studio system is still very much around. It's not new Hollywood, but it still is in its own kind of time period where it's looking back on a time when it's a full generation after that silent film era.
Well, that's
kind
kind
of
of why
to show you that Hollywood was willing to defile its own corpse for over 75 years already here. So.
And when Norma talks about like the new, like she keeps talking about how these new stars are not like what they used to be, which is funny because this movie would have been made at a time when the stars were, I think, the kind of people that we typically now think of as the golden age stars, like Humphrey Bogart and Cary Grant and Jimmy Stewart, which for her are not as good as the silent era stars.
Yeah. William Holden.
And Holden, yeah.
William Holden's kind of,
and I think a lot of it.
Oh, go ahead, Andy.
No, I was just going to use the buzzword of the time, because everybody's talking about intertextuality of like the Star Wars movies and intertextuality of the Marvel movies and whatnot, which I think it's getting overused.
You'll never hear me say that word. But
to be honest,
and that's
there was a lot of
If anyone's going to use intertextuality, it would be him.
No.
But I would say that
Go on.
This is actually a really good example of intertextuality, because you have a silent film star who is a has-been at the time, playing this iconic role, and us as the viewer today, we don't necessarily appreciate the fact that meta casting of her and the meta burying of the monkey at the beginning of it, and then there's like a monkey that you're going to see later in the montage, the silent movie montage.
Wait, the what?
The burying
monkey.
Of the what?
Monkey.
That was a chimpanzee. But okay, I just want to get that out of the way.
By the way, that is one of the creepiest. Every time I watch this movie, because I watched it a couple times this week after watching it, back in college, I think was the last time I watched it, and the first time, like a few years ago. Every time you see that shot of the chimpanzee like lying out on the thing and the eyes are closed and it's like it looks like taxidermied almost and like sewed together, it gets creepier every time you see it.
Well, I found it heartbreaking, and actually the one moment that I was pulled out of it and I thought, here's where I will bring my modern sensibility and judge this movie harshly, is when he goes, "Is her life so empty?" Why? Just because she loves a chimpanzee as much as another person would love a child or a spouse? That was a line that I could not, get on the movie side with. But besides that, I understood its purpose of the film.
Well, he's also kind of brought in as the new monkey, right? Like the chimpanzee kind of has deceased, and he appears just as the chimpanzee is being buried. He's kind of the new chimpanzee, and you can kind of imagine like there's a chance that she maybe killed the chimpanzee or something happened to the chimpanzee, and it maybe I don't know if she necessarily killed it, but like the same way that the
died in lovemaking. I don't know.
I was gonna say this sounds like a side quest and or spin-off, but yeah, go ahead.
It's like how Macaulay Culkin was replaced Bubbles in Michael Jackson's house.
Oof, yeah, that you just thank you and scene. Yeah.
Things just got crazy.
Great movie now.
That was it. Drop it. Walk
Hey,
away.
I warned you, Conan. I was going to bring a crazy music
The high
reference.
heat.
Yet I still was not prepared.
No.
It's been a good 18 episode run.
Yeah.
You know.
Back it up, folks.
Sorry, we got to wrap it up now.
But no, so I think, but you know, it's interesting the same way that he appears just as this chimpanzee has passed away, and then at the end of the
dresses
movie,
him up right in the little suit. Same.
yeah,
Scene.
and at the end of the movie, you see, I mean, well, the beginning of the movie and the end of the movie, you see Joe Gillis dead and you know in a splayed out in the pool, like so you can almost think that all these things for her have a very short shelf life. I think. In some
Often
ways.
homage that scene too. That scene is often reused or homaged all over the place. Many other movies, TV shows, but still,
Tiny
what I
Toons,
noticed, like
Animal
rewatching it, it's still a powerful scene. You're like, oh wow, like it catches your attention immediately.
With the floating body, that
Yeah.
below the shot below, yeah. You know, I didn't.
Beautiful shot.
I hadn't seen the movie in I don't know 20 years or so. I saw it when I was in film school, and I did a quick little review of the Wikipedia, and it was interesting to read that they did that with a mirror. They tried to actually submerge the camera, and they didn't like what they got with it, so they laid a mirror on the bottom of the pool and then shot at an angle.
Oh wow!
So they could see from underneath him and put the guys behind him. I thought that was pretty cool. In terms of
Back on the air, guys. I learned something.
I just read Wikipedia.
I thought they hired a Silky as a cameraman to you know like a mer person. And
Just hang out.
That was how we were going to tie the Silkies in this episode.
Yes.
But you know, to go back to what you were saying, I think there's a lot more to mine about the whole like references and stuff. There's all these people playing themselves. I mean, you've got Eric von Stroheim not playing actually Eric von Stroheim, but playing someone just like Eric von Stroheim, ostensibly, if he had, you know, given up his career to become this woman's manservant. But you do have the real Cecil B. DeMille. For many people who are, you know, film normies, like basically one generation's synonym for film director, right? Like the Cecil B. DeMille. You've also had the real Hedda Hopper, which I thought that was an interesting bit of like, you know, she was the original Twitter. She was the original, you know, TMZ, so on and so forth. She was like
we watched a clip of when we were talking to Joseph McBride, which you know I should have plugged at the beginning of the episode. You know, like halfway through this, we're gonna have our conversation with Joseph McBride,
an actual expert, an actual informed,
and JG Michael come on, and we're gonna premiere that. But you know. We watched this clip where Billy Wilder, who you know was both the writer, one of the writers, and director, was talking about how originally what they wanted to do is they wanted to have Hedda Hopper sitting on the bed, and they wanted to have Luella Parson, who was her big rival, who they both like were the big gossip column queens of the time, and they had this this disgustingly like vile rivalry. Like if you could think of like there being two TMZs that are constantly battling it out, like TMZ and like National Enquirer or something. If they were
Perez Hilton and somebody else.
Yeah, exactly. And so
Perez Hilton, literally anybody. Yeah.
So they have this famous rivalry, and what he wanted to originally do is he wanted to have Hedda Hopper on one bed saying on the phone, and then he wanted to have Luella Parson, and she like they're both trying to get on the phone at the same time, instead of that bit at the end where he like it's a police officer and or you know. So they were going to be having them fighting over the phone at the very end, and like basically they're fighting over the story. And I guess Luella Parson realized that Hedda Hopper was actually like a good and trained actress, so she wouldn't do it because she thought she was going to be showed up.
It's probably a smart move.
Yeah,
you know, but also it's weird is you got Buster Keaton not even named. Not right, like one of the greatest film actors of all time, film artists of all time, directors, and then he's just like waxwork card player with one line.
Right.
Yeah.
It'd be like George Clooney showing up now and just like a bit part. Like, was that George fucking Clooney? Like,
But when
Yeah.
you and,
why was he
and when you
playing
see
cards?
when you see the shot of him too, I think you're supposed to like that audience would have recognized who he was because it's kind of the way it's framed. It's like, oh yeah, this is Buster Keaton. Like you don't
And he
have
gives
to
that
name-
one look. He's like, pass. And he gives
Yeah.
that one little Buster look, right? For it's like a half a second.
It
And
does
also,
seem like really ahead of its time though in that because I remember when I was a kid there was a show on TV called The Larry Sanders Show, which at the time was like made all of these, had real people playing themselves and that was a real draw of that show. And then after that show, everybody started to do it. I guess The Simpsons was doing it a little bit as well. But that seemed like a very 90s thing to me. And so when you see it happening in a 1950 movie, like obviously they were making movies about movies before that, like Sullivan's Travels or something like that. But I don't think that had as many sort of inside references as this movie does, where it's basically like the real life.
And it's based around. I mean, Norma Desmond is played by Gloria Swanson, who has an amazing career, and her career doesn't stop because she's not like good at talking or playing a like vocal role. Her career actually stops because she got tired of fighting the kind of vocally fighting the Hays Code people, like the censors, and she kind of gets bled dry in this like famous affair that she has with Joseph Kennedy, like decades before JFK was president. And she has this like famous decade and a half long affair that almost tanks his marriage and like almost becomes public record, where Joseph Kennedy wants to get into the movie business and puts all of his money into her pretty much. But then also at the same time, he's bleeding her dry. So she pretty much gets bled dry from her bank account by Joseph Kennedy, whose big thing is like he's the inside guy who can get get you around the Hays Code people. But it turns out he couldn't get her around the Hays Code people, and it became like this constant struggle with where she's fighting against the Hays Code people as a producer, which at the time United Artists was giving giving stars like creative control of their own work. So she leaves her Cecil B. DeMille contract to kind of take on her own role as a producer, one of the first pioneering women producers, and it turns into this nonstop fight against the Hays Code, which is just starting at that point and doesn't have the power that it did for the next 3 decades. So it's this interesting thing that kind of gets glossed over as, oh, well, she really just doesn't like words because she's so theatrical and so good at the silent film part of it. Her eyes are wide and she's constantly, like she's doing the spider hands. And like, the truth is that she actually did
like
begin to have a career in talkies, as they were called at the time. And just got tired of fighting for these creative projects that she really wanted to be part of. So it's
relatable.
One of the last films she does.
You and the Hays Code are like this constantly.
Oh yeah.
I'm just curious. Do you know what was her fight with the Hays Code? Like, what was it that she wanted to do that was not allowed under the code?
Well, this is the interesting part. The final, really, like the I guess the peak of the end is this movie, Queen Kelly, which is you see in Sunset Boulevard. It's the movie that she plays on the projector, and the director of that movie, Eric von Stroheim, is the same guy that plays Max, like her her first husband, Stroheim, yeah. So Eric Stroheim is so she's fighting against him because he wanted to do a scene in a brothel, pretty much, where they're in a dance hall and it's supposed to be a brothel and you're supposed to get that implied, and she's like, there's no way this can get around the Hays Code. So
she was a real dirty girl.
Yeah, and she was daring, really. Her art was always daring. She was promised by Joseph Kennedy that she could get this big picture that was pretty much about a prostitute through the Hays Code censors, and it ended up being this huge fight between her and the Hays Code.
She went.
That was Pretty Woman, by the way. No,
it took 45 years, but she went from sleeping with Joe Kennedy to supporting Ronald Reagan. That was her arc.
Yeah, that was her political arc.
It's not that big of a shift, really, when you think.
There's some horseshoe theory there somewhere, I think.
But remember, let's forget and please note that I'm not trying to defend Reagan. He was an actor. He was from that world, and so a lot of
How
times
dare you say that?
There was a little bit of an affinity just because they're like, oh yeah, Ronnie, yeah, I know him. I was in.
Yeah, no, he was a good guy to a certain point till he got his legs and arms cut off in that fire plant.
Yeah, friend of the show, Ronald Reagan. Which, by the way, I found 3 different connections to Reagan within this, and the first one is Gloria Swanson being Reagan's, chairwoman of senior citizens or whatever. But then also Llewellyn Parsons, who was supposed to be, who we were just talking about, the gossip columnist, kind of was the one, according to that Showtime documentary that came out, was the one that kind of shaped Reagan's career and like created the myth around him and introduced him to his first wife. So that was a second.
Jane Wyman.
Yeah, and also she was the one that promoted his relationship with Nancy Reagan at first. So she kind of they were from the same hometown. I'm trying to think of the third one between them, but anyway, there were all these connections that we were finding when we were in that conversation. So when we premiere that, it'll definitely be in there. We talked a lot about Reagan and the when he was president of the Screen Actors Guild and his role in we didn't talk a lot about it, but we talked briefly about his role in informing to the FBI and all of that.
I have to say I was initially worried about doing this podcast after Forrest was giving it up for Kissinger a few weeks ago, and now we're apologizing for Ronald Reagan. This is very.
When did I apologize for Ronald Reagan?
No, not you. It wasn't you.
Oh,
it wasn't you.
Oh, no, when Matthew Film Guy over there said he was good up to a certain point.
I feel like first Kissinger, then Reagan. I don't know. It's worrisome.
My
apologies. Wait till you get to talk about Joe McCarthy in the interview.
So this is the this is Kelly. I have clips of the Gloria.
We lost you there for a second.
Kelly process. Oh, I have 2 clips right here of I have 2 clips of this is the Queen Kelly clip.
I'm ready.
Queen Kelly is not a finished picture. The only thing that was rather difficult at the time was that he was taking longer to do 1/3 of the picture. Of course, pictures have budgets, and that means a certain length of months to shoot a picture. I happened to become worried about what was being shot, and since the 2 people that were being put in charge didn't seem to have any control over the situation, I walked off the set one morning after it was very early in the morning, and I had just had a cup of tea for breakfast, and went to the dressing room, my bungalow, where I lived actually, and called New York and called the bankers and said, I think you better come out here because I'm worried. Much of the stuff that we're making in this dance hall, quote, question mark, I think is censorable, and the Will Hayes office will never allow us to show it. And not only that, but we have 20,000 feet for the first third of the picture, and if we continue like this, we're going to be all year, and it's going to cost more than I wish to be responsible for. So, like that, the bankers were there. They didn't have jets in those days, but they were there before I knew it, as if they'd come by their own kites or their own steam. And so as a matter of fact, I never saw von Stroheim from that day until actually we were making Sunset Boulevard.
So yeah, I find that interesting, just like the amount of tension that must have been inherent in they're appearing together. And you can notice that when they play Queen Kelly in the actual movie, although they don't set it up that way, when they play that movie on the projector, they're like, oh well, Max was behind the projector setting it up. You don't see him in that scene. So I wonder if there's some moment where they were like, oh well, we can't be in the same scene when that happens.
I think maybe you see him for a second in the booth.
Yeah, but I mean that still I think is its own shot. So so this is a second clip of her talking about this and the process of I split them up because we only had an hour earlier with we only had an hour with Joseph McBride, and I didn't want to overwhelm him with clips, but this is the second one.
Sunset Boulevard, we didn't have a finished script. And so many suggestions were made, and von Stroheim, who couldn't help himself, he was creative, he made suggestions, and I can remember Billy Wilder saying, oh, that's wonderful, but it doesn't further the story, and we don't have the footage for it. But he came up with one. He came up with a magnificent idea that the fan mail that was sent to me, if you will recall, I thought was fan mail. He was writing them. This was von Stroheim's idea. And this was a magnificent idea. It was wonderful. We had nice times on the set, and I have wonderful recollections. And then after the picture, I met him here in France, you know. We even talked about doing something about Queen Kelly, making a new story around it, seeing if we couldn't save this beautiful material, which he had done where I was a convent girl. But unfortunately, I lived in America, he lived here, and then he left us.
Yeah, I included that little bit at the end because I think it's interesting that her eyes are so prominent within all of these silent films that she's in, and I think that it's really cool that Billy Wilder knew to exploit that throughout the movie. You know, as she's going crazier and crazier, her eyes get bigger and bigger, and you really, you know, you see that it's really all about the eyes in silent filmmaking. It's all about the gestural movements. It's all about, you know, all of these physical features, I guess, the physicality of it, rather than
this. Let me just ask you a question, because this was something that I was sort of puzzling, this being the first time I've seen it again in 20 years. To what extent was she being self-parodying? You know, to what extent were they exaggerating her movements and her eyes and her mannerisms to create this effect of like, this is a woman trapped in this old style of acting? I wasn't sure. I wasn't sure if we were meant to, because listen, our feelings towards her go all through the gamut. Your heart breaks for her. You think she's terrible. You think she's pathetic. You think she's triumphant. You think she's crazy. You think she's, you know, all these things. But, you know, is she meant to look silly, or is she, you know, right? Is the movie teasing her a little bit, or that style? This was a point of confusion for me this time through. I wonder what you guys think.
Well, there's a pastiche too of like Mary Pickford, like Clara Bow, et cetera. Like it's sort of like the character is like a pastiche of these different types of folks, but it also Gloria Swanson is that person as well. So it's like it's something where you see somebody playing a role that's also kind of them. Like I'm going to use one the favorite types of movies that came out recently, like when Robert Downey Jr. played Tony Stark. You know, it worked because he was an alcoholic smartass. You know, that was
and
8:31, and we got a Marvel movie reference.
There you go.
You did it. But I don't. We just saw that interview. She doesn't talk like this, and she doesn't do this. You know, so it is a style. I just wonder if they're, you know, making like the hit cool kids at the pharmacy, you know, at the drugstore. Thinks she's, you know, square, man, you know, because she acts like that, or is that?
But at the time of like talkies, as they called them, right? Like the idea was everyone was like looking back at all these silent movies as like, oh, that's all they do. It's all big motion and this and that. So that might have been like leaning into it almost as sort of like, oh, you think it was like exaggerated? I'm going to give you exaggerated.
Yeah,
right.
and
that's satire.
It definitely is parodying that style. And I mean, you watch the interview, she's nothing like that. She, you know what I mean? She's not, like, even her voice is nothing like that. She just has kind of a normal voice. And the struggle that she has is against the Hays Code censors in real life, which, you know, still exists at the point where Sunset Boulevard is made for another decade. Like, you know, the Hays Code really disappears after 1960 with Psycho coming out and like that year of filmmaking. So I think that she's definitely parodying herself. The part of it that's real, obviously, is that she's kind of this past figure that hasn't worked in, you know, 20 years and really is making a return through this movie. And obviously they're watching her actually act. But it's kind of like, what if she was the character that she acted like in all of these movies still, and wasn't kind of like a more fully formed person decades later? And what if she was kind of still trapped in that space, rather than being like she made a shitload of money. She invested her money during like World War II. I read today. She was paying for Jewish scientists during World War II to escape from Germany. She was starting these like kind of startup style businesses where she would give money and help them escape to America. She had all of these business ventures going on. She was making a shitload.
Does she have oil pumping in Bakersfield? Pumping.
But I think that's a good point. Like, because Gloria Swanson didn't go the Norman Desmond route at all. Like, she was, by the time she got the call for this, it was like she was already like deep in like a bunch of other stuff. She had basically decided to move on, but she was so intrigued by like, oh, this is interesting. Sure, yeah, this looks like a good role. I'll do it, which I think is fascinating in and of itself, really.
Well, it is, and that's another thing I learned from the Wikipedia that they gave it. They came up to either Clara Bow or Mae West, and Mae West was just like, I'm still like, she didn't want to do it because she thought it was.
Oh no, the story of it actually goes kind of deeper than that. We talked about it with you're going to see it in a little bit, but we talked about it with Joseph McBride. Kind of went into it because he talked about it with a lot of people that had kind of been through the process because he's written that Billy Wilder book. The first idea was that they had Mrs. Marlon Brando were going to be those two roles, but it wasn't going to be like a horror movie, which is what it became. It was going to be like a comedy with Mae West as the older woman and Marlon Brando as the younger man. And at the last minute, it got pulled. So they kept going with that idea. And actually, I think I have the clip where Billy Wilder talks about this. But basically, they went to Mary Pickford, who was like an iconic actress at that time, still from her silent movie roles, and Billy Wilder and his writing partner Charles Bracken, they had this idea that they were going to go to Mary Pickford and ask her, and at the last minute during this interview between the two of them, he pulls the plug and goes, "We can't ask her to do this. She's like too iconic. Like this is like disrespectful to even ask her to be part of this." So this is that clip, but.
Fairbanks, Mary Pickford, what was the name of Pickfair? And not me, Brackett, the Republican. He started telling her the story. I was blanching. I said, "Oh my God!" She finds out that he's gonna pay the guy to sleep with her. And I said, "Charlie, I think we made a mistake. I think that this is below the level of Miss Pickford. Miss Pickford is and I can't see. This is impossible. Forgive us, please. Let's go, Charlie. Let's go quick." And we just kind of. Then there was just every actress with a little. Then we got Swanson, and we would go to the front office. I think it was Barry De Silva then who was in the studio. She says, "For Christ's sake, Swanson, that's a piece of used toilet paper. You're crazy. She's acting all over the place like this." She says, "But that's what I want. I want an actress playing how it sounds, and we just see the exaggerations, the wildness, the craziness." Now, as they write about the picture or the play, it says, of course, it is lacking the genius of Gloria Swanson. We were very lucky. It was one of those things, where we just kind of falling into a tub of butter. It was easy. It just worked itself into something real and in something that could happen. and people that we knew, and we did not lie about them. And then we had, if you have a picture, where the leading man's line was very simple. I came to Hollywood because I wanted the pool. I got the pool, and I died in the pool. Once we had that, we had the whole thing. It was very difficult. It was very difficult because if you make a picture that plays among at the dentist convention in Albany, they will believe it. They don't know how. But pictures, and relations in front offices, and you would like to be critical, but you cannot kind of do Emile Zola's J'accuse, against Hollywood. It's too easy to. But in any case, after it was finished, Mr. Louis B. Mayer, having seen that at the showing at Paramount, I heard him talking to his henchmen, their whole group of Louis B. Mayer people. He says, "That son of a bitch Wilder," he says, "he's a foreigner," he says. We let him in. We gave him a life. We gave him a family, and now he's biting the hand that's been feeding him. And I got up to him, and the retinue of his. He says, "Mr. Louis B. Mayer, why don't you go and fuck yourself? My name is Wilder, and I did it." I mean, it was not that he was a guest, but the people around him. Les Majesté, what I have said to Queen Victoria, "Oh, go take him shit or something."
Billy Wilder's the best.
I do hope Gloria Swanson didn't see that though. She does not come off great.
I think she had passed away by the point that was filmed. Billy Wilder obviously was younger and lived longer. Well, she lived to be in her 90s, so I'm not saying Billy Wilder lived longer in that sense. I think he died at 89, but lived longer year by year than she did, I think. But
Mary Pickford is too good for this. Go find Gloria Swanson. The piece
I knew what he wanted. He wasn't nice about it, but he knew what he wanted.
That's true. And that clip does kind of suggest that was her kind of acting style, I guess, to some degree, or at least Wilder seemed to think so.
Well, or I mean, I don't know if it implies that, or if it implies more that he wanted her to act that way, and he wanted her to act like this, faded silent film star. She clearly isn't like that in any of the interviews that she did after that.
But in the other films she's done, I think is what he was referring to, that this was her old style.
Yeah,
definitely more exaggerated. Was. And and like again, we're looking at with a modern viewpoint, but it was a big deal culturally for there to be like people talking in motion pictures, and it was a huge, like a sea change on the level of which we can't really comprehend because we weren't there, of course, that I'm aware of. And I think the fact that there is like an element of like low grade farce to it, like I think that's one of the reasons why she decided to just be like a more exaggerated version of who they thought she was. And that's one of the things that makes it so fantastic, because I mean the entire like relationship, like toxic and almost like predatory, emotionally predatory in a way. In a way, like it's
more than in a way.
Yeah.
No,
I mean, I guess
really was toxic and emotionally predatory.
But I think it's a tribute to her talent as an actual artist, as an actor, that she could do all that. And I was moved by her for several reasons on several occasions, like literal tears flowing. Just even though she is this, I don't know, cartoonish kind of person, she was a real person inside. Yeah.
And do you know something that's crazy is that obviously in this movie they make a big deal of the fact that she had 3 husbands before. Her in real life she had 6 husbands throughout her life.
Wow.
She was on husband.
Nobody would have believed that. That would have been too outlandish.
But I mean, well, also I think a couple of the husbands were after this movie was filmed anyway. But like
this led to at least 2 or 3 more being available.
Like on top
like
of
husbands
affairs.
like box bets. Yeah, go ahead.
No, but like on top of affairs with like people like Joe Kennedy, like so 6 husbands on top of that, and at the end of her life, she was in her 90s. She was still having an on and off relationship with her husband, one of her last husband. So she like, you know,
at 90, I should hope it's even somewhat on. Would be amazing if she was having it.
And
Ew.
she had a very interesting. She was like an early health food person. Like even, you know, decades before really that became like a trend. Like,
Well, that reminds me of that scene where she's undergoing the youth lift and like all the electrodes and like the chin lifter and all these things. The height of 1950s youthful looking technology. That was an incredible sequence.
Which is
would have
somewhat
been,
homaged in things like Brazil, right? I mean, like that's like such a clear
Right.
homage.
but that also would have been incredibly, I don't know, like almost alarming to audiences. I think when this movie came out, like I don't think anybody. We were talking about this earlier. I think like I don't think anybody necessarily knew that. Like I don't think anyone really ever looked at that like a Star's beauty regimen. Like you know what I mean? Like there was kind of an understanding that Stars looked like that.
I don't know. You were there, not me. I don't know if that was true or not. But I'll tell you this: she was look. The young writer, said she was 22. William Holden was, I think, 32. Gloria Swanson was 50. Okay,
Yeah,
I'm 46. So if I'm thinking like, you know, obviously in the years of Hollywood, way over the hill by 40. But so for 50, it's not like she's, you know, this crypt keeper like sitting in her dank basement. It just was amazing to me that you know. I guess it is that area where you're just on the edge of like, I can still hold on with all the technology at my disposal, you know, the $6 million facelift. But that she was considered such an antique. I mean, who am I kidding? Like who's a 50-year-old that's the equivalent in today's Hollywood? There is nobody that's playing a, you know, their moms, their grandmas at this point if you're 50.
Or it's like The Irishman, where it's like
J-Lo.
they do de-aging to make everyone look like weird, like, you know, video game avatars.
That's right. I look forward to Scorsese's next picture with, you know, all these old stars just in their prime. Why not? She could have had another 20 years on her career.
and you know, Scorsese is now going to have a baby. Joe Pesci is a baby on.
My God.
With the de-aging. No, I think that, but it's kind of talking about disposability in a way that, you know, I think a lot of older women talk about in Hollywood now, like Meryl Streep, like, you know,
Right.
Glenn Close,
Exactly.
like actors like that have kind of been pretty vocal about the fact that roles have been, you know, pretty vocal about the fact that after a certain age, I mean, going into middle age, those roles dry up. And this movie is kind of commenting on that way ahead of its time because Gloria Swanson, looking at her, like when you see her in pictures and you see her in these films, is incredibly beautiful and still is in this movie, I think. I mean, although they make her look as creepy as possible, but like she's, you know, at the time, she's like the most beautiful, you know, young starlet you can possibly think of. And I was listening to a podcast today where they were talking about how, I guess when DeMille comes up to her and goes, and says something like, "Oh, hello there, young fella." It was like something that he actually said to her as like a name because she was like a daring young fella. Like she was the most brash and like daring and really like the most beautiful starlet of her day. And then by this time, like, you know, she even did like a TV pilot at one point. She did all these like different other projects, but you know, between 1930 and 1950, really wasn't in movies. And not because she couldn't talk, because there actually is a couple movies where she did get into talkies, and she's actually pretty good at acting in them. But she kind of, I think, had exhausted herself.
I think you're right. It definitely was about, you know, it was that criticism that in a way is what I think Louis was talking about, biting the hand that feeds, you know, that Hollywood will chew you up and spit you out. And when they're done with you, it's as if you never existed. But it was one of the greatest moments in the whole movie is when she goes on the set and like the two old stage hands, the old security guard, and she gets a reminder that there are some people who do remember her and think of her fondly. That was like one of the most moving moments of all of this, is that even though the business might say we're marketing you out of here and we need to get the next and the new, there are people who, and especially in today's nostalgia culture, we're realizing that you could just mine that stuff forever if you're actually smart about it. But that she had true fans and people still loved her who remembered her. It's just the culture was like on this conveyor belt. It's just like.
Well,
and
yeah.
I think, no,
Well, I was gonna say that I was reading an article. I'm embarrassed to say, I think it was in the Guardian, but I was reading this article about Sunset Boulevard, where it basically it made an interesting comparison between Nora and Joe, because they're kind of almost parallels in this movie. The movie starts off, Joe hasn't had a success in a while. Obviously, it hasn't been as long of a time as Nora, but it's been some time since he's been successful. He's trying to get work. He can't get work. And then he finds Nora, and he starts to help her with her script. And then later on in the movie, Betty comes along and helps Joe with his script. And Betty has her own story of wanting to break into the acting business and not being able to break into it because first of her nose, and then they just didn't want her. And this whole movie is just filled with character after character who want to be part of this business, but keep getting shuffled out of it. And Norma's the most tragic. I mean, Norma's tragic, but then Joe ends up dead as well. So, there's a few of these kind of.
There's
tragic.
no more tragic than dead, I think.
Yeah, it's probably
bases loaded ever found its audience.
Everybody ends up probably being dead because this movie,
they're all dead.
It's like all those vaccine takers in the 1900s. They're for smallpox. They're not alive anymore.
Yes.
Sorry, it's not you.
50 years. I think if I don't take the COVID vaccine, I'll still be alive.
Let me tell you,
we
friend.
didn't need vaccines. We had faces.
Let me tell you, friend. We're all dead. Everyone, see? Everyone that took that vaccine now, they're dead. 1918. No, but I think that another thing that is shown throughout this movie is that the skill set for silent movies, like that.
By the way, Nancy Olson, according to Wikipedia, is still alive. She's 93.
She was married to one of the writers of My Fair Lady, and just as this movie came out, My Fair Lady I think was debuting on either West End or Broadway or something, and was dedicated to her, or within a couple years of this movie coming out anyway, which is a fun fact that I learned from the Amazon Prime trivia box.
I love that, the X-ray. I've learned a lot from the X-ray.
Another thing that I learned from the X-ray in this is that Cecil B. DeMille for his cameo in this was paid $10,000 for 1 day of shooting. That's how much he asked to be in this movie. And then they needed to get like a final close up, and he decided, all right, I'll be in your movie with another close up, another $10,000 for one more day of shooting, just this one shot. They ended up giving him, I guess, a Cadillac or something, or they gave him a car and they gave him $3,000, but it was like a $6,000 car. So essentially they like caved into his demands.
He's no dummy. You can't out pimp a pimp. But let's go back to the tragic thing, because I like that. There's more there because you have, because Joe is actually sort of a conniver, right? Like he starts off just trying to get money for his car. Like I don't think he's thinking this is a career break for me. He's just a gigolo, really, at the beginning.
Side hustle,
right? Just straight looking for the cash, right? He hides his car, that's being repossessed, and he stumbles into this, crazy scenario, which is like, almost Three's Company-esque in its like unlikelihood. But then when he starts to get in too deep, he's like, well, this is, he starts to think maybe could be something, but it's like, it's a mutual usury. Like this is a question in my mind, like two people who basically, soon as one says like, I want off this mutual usury, then you can't get out, right? But I think he does do the one noble thing, which is to tell I forgot the Nancy Olson's character's name, but the young writer, like what was it? Betty? Yeah. Betty. If it wasn't Betty, it should have been Betty. But look at
Betty now.
I am trash. I am filth. You don't want anything to do with me. And go hang out with Dragnet and give him just your facts, ma'am. That's another thing, by the way, just like him playing this sort of like kooky, young, like not at all what he turned into for his like sort of iconic role, but go be with this good-natured schlub.
He kind of looks like Jerry Lewis a little bit.
I was thinking he looked like Bob Denver. He's like got a Gilligan quality, but
Yeah, no, 100%.
But so he does the right thing by her.
I was thinking Richie Cunningham.
Richie Cunningham. These are all good references. Like literally Richie Cunningham at
Just
the
a
time.
bunch of goofs.
Yeah, right. but she, Betty is open about. She's like, this isn't for you. This is for my career. Like she actually is above board with the fact that this isn't. Yes, she falls in love with him, and that that will they or won't they is like an element just that the movie.
There's like a weird amount of sexual tension from the very beginning, though.
Of course,
they're at that party and they're like doing the weird voices, and like I still don't like.
He almost kissed her in the bathtub, but he knows like
their chemistry was great. I mean, just fantastic.
Yeah, and
I wanted them to fuck in the end.
All right, I'm putting that in my diary tonight. But I'm just saying, like that's the moral quandaries there. He resists that one, so he's not a total a-hole, right? Like for the most
he's a
part.
gigolo that can't commit to either one, right? Like he's a gigolo that can't commit to being a gigolo. He can't commit to this life of usury that he's kind of been reduced to, and in its own way, that's its own tragic story because he's 31 and he seems like he's already dried up creatively, and the Hollywood system. I mean, at the beginning, and I made this joke earlier during the Joseph McBride thing, which is funny that that's premiering in the future because
we didn't hear it. It's new to us.
Time travel's a bitch.
Well, so I made this joke earlier where when he says at the beginning when he's like, oh well, either my ideas were not creative enough, and he's like pauses, or he's like, oh, or they were too creative. I'm like, were they though? Like you seem a little lazy with these ideas, but anyway,
Bases Loaded sounds amazing.
Yeah, he's at the point where he's trying to write trash. He's like, I tried for my, Barton Fink epic. Now I'm going to try the wrestling movie. I'm just going to try to give them what they want.
Right.
And that's harder to do than it looks. Which
is actually really funny because we just had the Joseph McBride conversation. He's going from his book on Billy Wilder. His next book is on the Coen brothers. So that's an interesting
two genre hopping Hollywood guys that sort of had their own stamp on things. I get it.
That are both doing the whole nostalgia for not necessarily. I mean, I guess Billy Wilder told Joseph McBride that this is his Valentine to classic Hollywood.
Wait, Sunset Boulevard is
some Valentine.
Well, that's interesting because that's what's so funny about the thin skin of the executives. Who are just like, he's biting the hand. He's not really biting the hand. Like he's sort of tweaking the hand, but it's not. It's a love letter in a lot of ways.
Yeah, it's not like My Bloody Valentine. It's
right. It's not even Day of the Locust. It's not even. There's a million other ones. It's not SOB. There's some really more scathing Hollywood satires. This is tame, relatively speaking.
And it fits within this noir tradition that's going on in the 40s and 50s, which kind of is a disillusionment with everything. You know what I mean? Like,
yes,
why wouldn't that up? Yeah, well, why wouldn't the disillusionment also go into Hollywood? There's already a disillusionment with the government. There's a disillusionment with society in general. There's a disillusionment with law enforcement in a kind of brilliant way because the Hays Code is still in force. You can't make your evil characters or your criminal characters into heroes. So, you know what I mean? If you're disillusioned by everything else, Double Indemnity is another Billy Wilder movie that's brilliantly cynical. Like
I've been trying to bring up Double Indemnity the whole show, so I'm glad you finally did because I think I'm going to get a chance otherwise. I love that movie.
And right after Sunset Boulevard, he does Ace in the Hole, which is definitely a cynical movie, a really sort of angry movie.
I just watched that last night actually, and it made me think because the whole movie is an indictment on the media, basically. Media selling to the sort of the lowest common denominator, and it made me think like Sunset Boulevard. There's these weird little comments about the media every now and then, like the very beginning, before you get this story blown out of proportion. Let me tell you it my way. You find out that Norma Desmond's career is kind of destroyed. Cecil B. DeMille suggests that it was her press agents that kind of destroyed her soul.
Which, if you look at the history of Gloria Swanson, is absolutely fucking devastating. She got an abortion. She had a botched abortion during her career at one point during an affair, and she was living in Paris at the time, or she was in Paris shooting a movie at the time, and they literally picked up on like during her life and death, like she might die from an infection from a botched abortion. The same press agents are sitting there in real life going, covering it in this like really rapacious, disgusting way. And that was towards the end of her disillusionment with Hollywood, where she's like, I don't want to fight like this anymore. Like, I don't want to fight the censors. I don't want to fight the press. So that part of it is true.
That's what happened to Steve Bannon too, I think.
If I may, real quick, there was a point that would have made way more sense about 5 minutes ago when it was said, but the whole idea of I'm just whatever, I'm gonna write what the people want, and that being like harder than it actually seems like it might be. You can apply that to music as well. Like, I've had this talk with a lot of music people who even like had hits or whatever, that it's real easy if you're like, well, I'm an artist, like I would never lower myself to write something that sounds like, the Foo Fighters or whatever. The thing is, it's actually kind of hard to do. If it was really easy to do, more people would be doing it. But the worst thing is to try and to do it and to fail. And so I think that kind of gets at the center of the heart of, like, he doesn't even know if he's going to be good enough to do that.
Right.
Right. Like, I tried to sell out, but I did it unsuccessfully. Wow. That is the saddest story. Well, I guess sad story is weird.
Because it's incredibly interesting that the Joe Gillis character goes to sell out and like literally finds like the one script girl, or maybe not the one script girl, but like one of the script girls that really like care about whether or not a picture is good. Because I'm sure that there are several others, at least in his mind, that he's thinking like, nobody really gives a fuck. Like, you can make a terrible movie and no one's going to care, and I'm just going to do that, and my creative process is sapped. And he finds the one person that's like, listen, I've read your work before and I enjoyed it, and this sucks. Like, that's kind of like that's like a lightning bolt moment, I think.
Sure, of course it is. Yeah.
It's also meet cute.
I totally thought you said Meat Cube for a second, and I was like, whoa, what's that movie? Is that a horror movie?
My new film coming out, Meat Cube.
It's Ice Cube's less known younger brother.
Yeah.
Look, I know we have to wrap up soon, but I just wanted to say one more thing about the film.
We can go for a few more minutes.
No, we have to wrap it.
All right.
But no, I'm just kidding. But the
I'm ready for my close-up now.
You're in close-up. I'm in a wide. Andy's in the close-up. But the whole disillusionment thing about film noir and the cynicism and so on, this has got that look and feel thanks to the DP, like thanks to the way it's shot. Like, it's all these kind of like high contrast stuff. Even the outside shots kind of look like it's dark. The morning is the opening it's a morning, but it's still like very, very sort of gray. The tones have that film noir look. But I feel like this is not quite, even though it has like the death of the character doing his own voiceover and all that classic kind of film noir stuff. This, and also I feel like other Billy Wilder stuff, this is like the it's not cynical, but it's like you prick a idealist and you get a cynic, something like that, right? Like, this is a guy who I think is really a sweet-hearted artist, Billy Wilder. Like, so even his version of satire it's not that dark. It's wistful in some way. It has some quality to it that isn't full on just like nihilistic sort of post-war ennui, which maybe some of the other more classical examples of film noir do have. Because this is,
it has heart. Yeah, absolutely.
It has heart, and he clearly loves the subject that he is lampooning. Like, he's not this outsider. He's Billy Wilder, for God's sakes.
It reminds me a lot of Elmore Leonard. Like Elmore Leonard's a more modern tradition of this kind of bringing in humor to a darker story. But
Shorty right after this.
And which I think the movie's actually better than the book.
The TV series is better than
I'm
both,
not reading the book. So what?
I said the TV series is better than both. It's actually really good.
The TV series has nothing to do with anything. Like the TV
that's not
series,
true at all, but go ahead.
It's in name only.
No, that's not true. Go ahead.
Oh no, I mean, because you're missing all the strengths of what makes Elmore Leonard great in the TV show. But anyways, the movie I think captures what makes Elmore Leonard great, Get Shorty. But just in general, like a lot of his writing, there is satire, there is humor, there's this dark, great dialogue, all the hallmarks of a Billy Wilder film you can find in Elmore Leonard. But it's kind of weird because it took Elmore Leonard like 40 years after Sunset Boulevard to figure this out. I mean, Elmore Leonard started writing westerns in the 50s, so like he was a kind of contemporary of Billy Wilder at you know, at the time, but you know, it took him a long time before he could figure out how to write his stories well.
He found his voice late in life. Yeah, I mean,
he did.
But I'm just looking at the list of Billy Wilder's like main credits, and you've got like some of the all-time classics of Hollywood cinema: Ninotchka, Double Indemnity. You mentioned Lost Weekend, which they amped before that, and Lost Weekend there's like no cynicism, and that's like a heart on the sleeve movie if there ever was one. That's like a pure, just open vein, watch it bleed on screen kind of a movie for Hollywood in the 40s. Ace in the Hole, Stalag 17, Sabrina, Some Like It Hot, 7 Year Itch. I mean, these are all, you know, they're quality. The Apartment, that's probably my all-time favorite one of all of them. That is a true lovely movie, a movie about heart and not trying to be cynical and smarter than the audience kind of a thing. So, you know, I guess this is all just a tangent on like, you know, the darkness or the cynicism of film noir, but I feel like it's almost a feint in this movie.
Well, and we talked during our Joseph McBride interview, because a lot of it is about Billy Wilder himself and like, you know, what he went through in his career. And a big part of it is at one point kind of during the whole the Al Pacino trials.
They were all they were totally out of order.
During the House Un-American Activities Committee hearings, you know, when
or whack.
You know, he kind of isn't necessarily targeted by it, but decides to lay off on some of his more critical, you know, his more critical filmmaking stuff, and really, you know, when he pushes the envelope, he kind of lays off on after Sunset Boulevard, and so some of his, you know, some of his more, I think, lighthearted stuff comes in that period, but
he's like, I'm a Jew, but leave me alone.
But also, you know, he's not. He's from Poland. You know what I mean? Like he's kind of. He's not.
He's worse than a Jew. He's a foreign Jew.
How dare he?
And well, but I mean, in the sense of like, you know, you're already under suspicion if you're from a different place. So, you know,
and a Jew. But anyway, I digress.
Yeah, you know, so Joseph McBride talked to us a lot about how he took off for Europe at some point.
Oh yeah, that's right. He did, right? He's like,
you know, really kind of laid off. Yeah. So he kind of laid off on being as cynical as he could have been, and then, you know, towards the end of his life, he kind of becomes the one of the first what I would call like masterclass style lecturers, where he goes around and did a lot of because he lived a long time, and he ended up doing a lot of that.
Rock on tour too.
Yeah.
I mean,
so he ended up doing a lot of that
story.
A lot of the screenwriting, like this is how you screenwrite kind of things, which is interesting because in Sunset Boulevard, you know, with the relationship between Joe and Betty, that's kind of what he's doing. You know what I mean? Like he's seeing someone younger than him, and he's kind of channeling his own. I think Billy Wilder's kind of channeling his own career through Joe Gillis, and he's looking down. Like the thing that really warms his heart and kind of melts it is the fact that she's a aspiring screenwriter that really cares about screenwriting still, and you know, is right now just a researcher, but like in that sense, like he ends up going towards the end of his life. If you look up like his AFI stuff, like there's tons of interviews, and he didn't really do that many interviews throughout his actual film career, but by the end of it, he's like teaching a lot of people how to screenwrite.
Yeah, there's hope and optimism in her, right? That is absent in him because he's just been beaten the hell down. And in a way different way, you know, Norma Desmond has also, but there's like this kind of idea of still wanting to be adored, like the whole thing with the fan mail even, right? Mm-hmm. And it's like, oh, well, she's not even writing back with any of this stuff, but like, she wants to know that the fans are there.
Now she would have a reality show right about now in this time of her career. They would come back in and be like, where is she now? She's in a house with Bronson Pinchot, and can they survive?
I would watch that.
Greenlit, by the way. Totally greenlit.
Yes.
So this is the last clip I'm going to play. It's from one of those how to screenwrite lectures. This is a strange clip because it's Billy Wilder towards the end of his life, realizing that he couldn't have made Sunset Boulevard without the studio system, and realizing that like a movie like this can't be made now because, you know, PC culture or whatever. No, he's realizing that a movie like this he's realizing a movie like this can't be made right now because the studio system doesn't exist. So the ability to get all of these different stars and all of this past archive footage and, you know, like all of these different things that a studio could grab, you know, it couldn't have been made without. So it's kind of this codependent relationship that he himself had with the studios.
That is an example. How long would it take to write that screenplay? Would it take 6 months? Would it take
Well,
3 months?
this took a rather long time. It was a complex character with a complex picture with complex characters that we had to kind of explore. But we were very lucky. This picture could not be made today. Look, the difficulties they have with the state thing. We needed a studio where we had to photograph. We were in a studio at Paramount. We needed, because that was her last director, we needed Mr. DeMille. We got Mr. DeMille.
Hello, Mr. DeMille.
It's good to see you.
The last time I saw you was someplace very gay. I remember waving to you. I was dancing on a table.
A lot of people were. Lindbergh had just landed in Paris.
We needed a guy who is her valet, who's running the house for her, who is an old-time director, which we find out later, and was married to her. Well, we took Stroheim, and we had a picture that Stroheim shot with Gloria Swanson, Queen Kelly, so we could run that. We needed Buster Keaton. We needed all kinds. H.P. Warner for that the bridge party there. We needed a young unknown actor who plays the unemployed writer, and if you want to, they kept the guy. And we found that guy. We had Montgomery Clift. It was a new thing from New York, and that was it. And that was like 3 days before we started shooting. Then his agent, a lady, I forget her name, she said, Mr. Montgomery Clift is not going to be in the picture. I advised him that if he makes that picture where he is having an affair with a woman twice his age, he is finished forever in Hollywood. Nobody would use him for any other picture. So the day before we started shooting, you know, we got hold of a junior actor under contract to Paramount and Columbia. I'd made one picture. What was it? The Golden Glove, some kind of a box. Golden Glove. So I gave him the script. I said, hold. I gave him the script, and he came back like an hour and a half later. He says, I must play that. Absolutely perfect. Just an unknown writer, you know, but he should be an actor also.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't want to argue with the maestro, but there's a version of the, you know, reference movie that has been made. I mean, there's dozens of them, right? They're bringing people back. It's like a whole genre right now. Nothing's coming to mind, but maybe there was a midpoint where it couldn't happen. But now it's like there's 8,000 celebrities you can reference that. You don't need Cecil B. DeMille. You just need, you know, a Gary Coleman.
Tarantino was kind of doing that. You know, it was kind of like the first in the modern era, I think. You know, with John Travolta, because like John Travolta's career was dead at that point, and you know, all of a sudden he started in Pulp Fiction, and then you know,
yeah, but he's not really playing himself per se, so it's a little bit different there.
It's not like they're going back to like, you know, it's not like he has a Grease poster in his room, and they're like, you know what I mean? Like, you could bring people back, you know, their careers back pretty frequently. It's this is more of like I think a genre feel, you know what I mean? Like, creating someone's entire career, their entire career backlog, and bringing it back from the dead for something that really feels like it's been gone for decades. And you know, it's fascinating. They have that Queen Kelly movie that no one had ever seen before because it was never finished or released. You know, like, so I don't know. A lot of that stuff was interesting.
Did Billy Wilder live long enough to see Being John Malkovich?
I think so.
I don't think so.
Oh wait, no, that was 2005, and he got 2002, so he wouldn't know.
Oh, so he's not going to see the movie about Nicolas Cage having to play Nicolas Cage, playing Nicolas Cage.
Oh yeah, adaptation.
1999. 1999. He did live long enough.
Yeah, or you got you know, you did the Robert Englund was in New Nightmare, where they did like him as the Freddy Krueger actor, right? That was pre-Scream where they started to do the self-referential thing. There's
Billy Wilder would have loved that movie.
He would have. I think he did see the first Nightmare and said it was great.
Well, anything Bruce Campbell's really been in is a callback to Evil
Did he
Dead.
play himself in something?
He was in that show Ash versus Evil Dead that kind of follows.
Well, no, he did do
he was still playing Ash though. Did he?
He played himself in something. What was that? It was the movie where he had to fight the Chinese ghost with the green curd. Oh God.
But I feel like there's been a whole slew of like, if not movies, then like shows where it's like that guy, he's back and now he's playing himself, but a slightly
Jason Bateman, Arrested Development.
Well, shows you can still do that for the same reason that you could do that with a studio in the 1950s, or you know what I mean? Like when shows are still very much run by a studio, unless they're on streaming service. But so shows really, you can make a show on the same channel and call back to that, or they're owned, like a bunch of channels will be owned by the same main like parent company. So it's like you can still do that with television.
But you can still do it in movies too. I mean, look at Michael Caine. He did like Blame It on Rio, and then like Children of Men, right? So I mean, like obviously, like there's some referential, like, oh, you remember you used to like this guy, right? Like here he is in a role that
the referential.
But he's not playing Michael Caine. That's I think what he was saying. Like we wanted Cecil B. DeMille. We wanted got the actual people.
Well, I think it would be too expensive to grab iconic. Like it's the studio paying for it at that point. It's the studio that has the footage that didn't get released.
In some ways, that card game was like the original Expendables, but it was just them playing cards instead of like taking down bad guys.
I mean, The Expendables is obviously the best possible example you could use. Not a great movie or series, but like that is like all those guys being those guys.
Bruce Campbell played Bruce Campbell in My Name is Bruce.
So what was that? I didn't see that.
Is that off of his autobiography?
No. He plays himself. He gets hired by like this town to get rid of a monster. It's that kind of. I mean, like we've seen that plot before.
I missed that.
But the thing is, though, it's Bruce Campbell doing it, and he's kind of playing against. He's kind of mocking himself. So it's a lot of fun. It's not a great film, but it is Bruce Campbell doing Bruce Campbell stuff. So
and of course you mentioned the Gary Shandling's thing. What's it called?
Send Diaries of Gary Shandling.
No, the
Larry Sanders Show.
The Larry Sanders Show, where he wasn't real, but everybody else basically around him almost like every week he would be the
theme song of all time too, because it tells you exactly what's going to happen in the show in the theme song, which is great.
Another movie that I was thinking of that does something similar is The Player, Robert Altman's movie, The Player.
Yeah.
Which is another
scathing Hollywood satire.
Yeah, great movie. Really, really great movie. And has these kind of real references in it as well. Altman would do that. He would bring in real people playing themselves. Like Elliot Gould is in Nashville, and Alex Trebek is in
Shortcuts is full of them. Like Shortcuts is like half of the freaking cast are people like playing archetypes like the character.
That's funny.
By the way, The Player, of course, great candidate for a future episode.
Which one?
The Player.
Sure.
Yeah, I'd be down for that. So we have to wrap up and premiere this Sunset Boulevard interview, Billy Wilder interview, I guess technically, with Joseph McBride and J.G. Michael. I'm sorry I didn't bring the full 100% energy today. I'm so shot after getting this puppy and waking up at
what kind of puppy is it, by the way? I just want to know this.
It's a hound mix, so I'm not sure what she's mixed with, but she has that. She like
a blender.
She already. I don't think. All right, so she's traveled like a lot by now because she originally was in Louisiana, and like so the hurricane or whatever happened, and she got brought up to Long Island, which is where I got her from. So she's like a rescue. So she's a rescue from a rescue shelter.
She's literally been rescued from a storm.
Yeah, she's a rescue that got rescued from a storm, pretty much. And
God bless you. Good luck with
a good reason to be very low energy.
I didn't notice at all. I didn't notice at all.
So you definitely noticed, but but I think that I don't think she knows what she's smelling because I don't think she's been out in the world very much. But like she definitely is already using her nose to like track, like because I took her out today and she's tracking something, but I don't think she knows what it is. So it's been really cute to watch that today.
Hide your stash.
Yeah.
Can
Yeah,
I?
dogs will tell on you. A cat's
Turns
won't.
out she's a police dog. No one thought we could do it. We rescued a police dog, and it's incredible, folks.
We love our police dogs. Since we're derivating here at the end, I just real quick want to point out that I am uncharacteristically wearing a T-shirt for the show, and it's a custom Audrey Horn.
Oh wow!
Oh, cool.
I actually named this dog's name is Audrey, by the way. That's crazy.
Wow, that's awesome.
Well,
Synergy, right?
We just went to the Black Lodge.
After Audrey Horn from Twin Peaks?
No,
Yes.
after originally this morning I was thinking about how we were doing Billy Wilder today, and her original name was Abigail, and I didn't like the way they spelled Abigail. They spelled it weird, so I decided her name is Audrey after Audrey Hepburn because I was trying to name her after some trying to find a name I liked that was also like a movie star name.
Great
I felt like that
reference.
was, yeah.
But the reason why I wore this shirt was obviously because of your dog. But no, the secondary reason was because David Lynch is a huge Sunset Boulevard fan to the point.
Oh yeah, Gordon Cole. We didn't bring up Gordon Cole.
I was just gonna say to the point that he named his character in Twin Peaks an archetype of himself in certain ways, Gordon Cole. So that's why I dug out this. Not that I had any excuse to dig out one of my favorite T-shirts, but that's why I wore this T-shirt today.
Nice.
Thank you.
I love it.
All right. Well,
story about my T-shirt. You're welcome, America.
We all gotta do episodes soon of this that are a little bit more structured. I think I had a fun time though talking through this movie. For 2 different interviews today. I mean, I think there's so much to say about it that you really you can't do too many. So with that in mind,
this was just the
next
appetizer.
week we're coming back together and talking about it some more.
Well, next week we're gonna have Matthew Film Guy on, and he's gonna talk to us about Slacker, and that's gonna be a really fun, fun movie to talk about. And we
that
also
episode will
obviously
connect to the next episode, and it just will keep going.
Yeah,
each person.
that's how it goes. And also we're having Natalie Shure on Tuesday to talk about the Naked Gun series, which should be it's going to be incredible, really incredible, folks.
There's
All
no
right.
need. There's no need for that.
With that, I am debuting our other half.
Yeah, now now he's running an interview with a guy. Did you? Well, you can. So again,
Okay, you're watching Movie Night Extravaganza. I am here, as always, with my co-host, J. Andrew World, with J.G. Michael, host of Parallax Views, and with Joseph McBride, who, among other things, is a film historian, a cinema professor at San Francisco State University, the co-writer of the musical Rock and Roll High School, and author of several books, including Frank Capra, The Catastrophe of Success, which is, yesterday I listened to the episode that you did with JG talking about Frank Capra, and just the fact that he really just didn't live up to any of the politics that we associate with any of his movies, which is interesting because I didn't know that until talking with JG about that. But it also makes sense, I think, that he worked with Jimmy Stewart, who is another person whose politics definitely didn't live up to any of the movies he was in. I mean, he was kind of a incredibly reactionary Reagan Republican, at least at the end.
They're quite different from their image, but still great filmmakers. And a lot of what I do in my film books is to try to reveal things that are hidden, things that are unknown about people, or people who are misunderstood for one reason or another. That's what I think part of the job of the film historian is.
Yeah. And
I was going to say, Forrest, you forgot to mention that Joseph was in the Orson Welles movie, The Other Side of the Wind.
Yeah. You were in the documentary that they made about it too, right?
Well, yeah, there are two documentaries about it. Netflix doesn't want you to see one of them. It's called The Final Cut for Orson, 40 Years in the Making. Yeah, when you go on Netflix, click on a little link that says trailers and extras. They hide that in there. It's really interesting about the post-production. They were more concerned about the main documentary that they financed called They'll Love Me When I'm Dead, which is about the making of the film and the trouble Wells had trying to finish it. But then Frank Marshall, who was one of the producers who finished the film, did this fascinating 40-minute documentary about the post-production, which was amazing. I was involved all along the way in one form or another, but they finished the film through Netflix, and it took 48 years to come out. I was acting in it for 6 years when I was quite young. So it's an amazing story.
I think I remember seeing, I think I saw They'll Love Me When I'm Dead. I don't know if I knew that there was the other documentary.
Nobody does that because they hide that really carefully. So watch, you'll enjoy it, I think.
Yeah, I enjoy hearing about Orson Welles. I'm like incredibly fascinated with him as a filmmaker, and just with as kind of a tragic figure. I think kind of the most tragic.
Well, I question that to some extent because I have a book coming out. It's Whatever Happened to Orson Welles: A Portrait of an Independent Career. I wrote in 2006. I've done 3 books on Welles, and this one I've just updated this one to include the completion of The Other Side of the Wind and the rediscovery of his early film Too Much Johnson. I take issue with the idea that he's basically a tragic figure. Sure, he had a lot of tough times and some tragedies along the way, but I think him as a triumphant figure who managed to keep making films all his life. I mean, when he died, the New York Times said in its obituary he'd been inactive as a director for the last several years, and they actually had to run a correction. It just wasn't true. He was shooting film every day. The thing was, he was shooting outside the system, and if you work outside the system in America, you don't exist. He's outside the commercial system. He was making independent films totally on his own. And the thesis of the book is basically he was doing that from the beginning of his career, and briefly he had the resources of a major studio or two. But he was always an independent and maverick, and I think that's to be admired,
No, and I definitely admire Orson Welles a lot. As someone that wanted to be a filmmaker, still wants to be a filmmaker, kind of has always hit a wall, I guess, when it comes to actually coming up with creative projects that aren't just kind of like podcasting or like short documentaries or something like that, So
maybe about podcasts or something. Because we live in an electronic world, a digital world, and I've told my students, if I were making films today, I would make films about people who are separated physically but are connected through Zoom or something like that, and you could do like a love story about people interacting on screens like you're doing or something like that. I don't know what plot I would do, but you could deal with our current reality and come up with some interesting things and shoot it. You could shoot a film very cheaply. Gary Graver, who was Welles's cameraman, I asked him in the late 90s, I said, how cheaply could you make a film today? And he was just getting into digital at that time. And he said, under $1,000. So all you need is a camera, and anybody can buy a camera for a few $100s. And you need to feed the crew and the cast, and you can do that cheaply, and that's about it. So you can film for almost nothing if you can get some locations, borrow locations that some friends have, and you can get actors and crew to work for nothing in exchange for credit. I come from the Rogers Corman School of Filmmaking, where he didn't really pay us much. So I'm into super low budget filmmaking. And Welles was too. Other Side of the Wind was a pretty low budget film, although it started getting more and more grand and expensive, and that was part of the problem. But by today's standards, he was shooting very cheaply. He had a small crew, and They were mostly like 19-year-old guys and a couple of women, and they were dedicated to him. And most of the actors worked for nothing, and things like that. You can do that today.
Yeah, and so I guess transitioning to a filmmaker who was doing something I think in some ways similar to what Orson Welles was doing, which is like this cinema verite almost expression of real but fictional at the same time. Of course, is Billy Wilder doing Sunset Boulevard, which I mean, flawless transition right there, I guess. But
he was making a quasi documentary about Hollywood. When I met him, I came from Wisconsin, and that's where I got interested in films. And I thought the film was too harsh a portrait of Hollywood. I thought writers complained too much, and then I got to Hollywood, and I was living in a dump. I had to get a place real quickly, and I found out it was right down the street from where Joe Gillis lived in Sunset Boulevard. I mean, like 3 blocks away, and then right around a couple blocks the other direction was the hotel where Nathaniel West set Day of the Locust, which is the greatest Hollywood novel, which is really a horror show. And so I was living in
also a movie with Karen Black.
Yeah, not a good movie, unfortunately. But read that book; it's just a great book. But anyway, I was in the midst of this hellish environment, and so I told Wilder when I interviewed him. I said I interviewed him a lot. I said I realized it's kind of like a documentary on Hollywood. He said it's a Valentine. I love that.
Yeah. I heard that. I heard you kind of tell that story when you were talking to JG about at the end of the Capra thing, which I thought was really funny that we have you on here talking about Sunset Boulevard, because at the end of that interview, JG says, I hope you're doing an episode or something on Sunset Boulevard soon. And so it's cool that we're doing that all now. So I have a couple clips of Billy Wilder. I thought this one was interesting, getting us into the actual, I guess, meat of Sunset Boulevard as a film, kind of to set it up. Talking about kind of the process around it.
Thanks, Gary Pickford put the name of Big Fair, and I, not me, Brackett, the Republican. He started telling her the story, and I was blanching. I said, "Oh my God!" She finds out that he's gonna pay the guy to sleep with her, and I said, "Charlie, I think we made a mistake. I think that this is below the level of Miss Pickford. Miss Pickford is and I can't see this. This is impossible. Forgive, let's go, Charlie. Let's quit." We just kind of. Then there was just every actress with a little. Then we got Swanson, and we would go to the front office. I think it was Barry De Silva then who was in the studio. And she says, "For Christ's sake, Swanson, that's a piece of used toilet paper. You crazy. She's acting all over the place like this." She says, "But that's what I want. I want to have a silent actress playing how it sounds, and we just see the exaggerations, the wildness, the craziness." Now, as they write about the picture or the play, it says, of course, it is lacking the genius of Gloria Swanson. We were very lucky. That was one of those things, where we just kind of falling into a tub of butter. It was easy. It just worked itself into something real and in something that could happen, and people that we knew and we did not lie about them. And then we had, if you have a picture, where the leading man's line was very simple. I came to Hollywood because I wanted the pool. I got the pool, and I died in the pool.
Yeah, he left out a couple of interesting facets of. I like your clips of Swanson. What a grand silent movie actress she was.
Yeah.
She did these wild, extravagant films, but she also did some simpler films. There's a beautiful film she did called Manhandled, directed by Alan Dwan, which is about an average shop girl in New York. It's just really delightful. But what happened was they were having great trouble casting this film. And as Wilder said, they went to Mary Pickford and they realized she was wrong for the part and they got out of there. But they also called Paula Negri, who was a great silent star, and she'd worked for Lubitsch a lot. and they found out her accent, Polish accent, was really heavy, and that's why she didn't make it in sound pictures. So they were kind of stuck, and they went to George Cukor, who's one of my favorite directors, and he knew all the great actresses, and he said, "Well, you got the perfect actress, Gloria Swanson. You know, I mean, like that was his stroke of genius." So he called her up, and I guess Paramount insisted she do a screen test, and she was terribly offended because, as she says in the movie, "I made Paramount Pictures." You know, when she's driving through the gate, that great scene, and the guy doesn't recognize her. She says, "Without you, there wouldn't be a Paramount Studios." And anyway, so she was offended. And then Cukor called her up and said, "Are you crazy? This is a great part. Do the test, for God's sake." She came out, did the test, and she got the part, and she was just perfect. And he, Wilder wanted the grand style, but he toned it down to some extent. Also, he beautifully directed film. And then he got William Holden, kind of serendipity. Originally, they cast Montgomery Clift, and he pulled out about a week before the start of shooting. And the story was that he was, I mean, we know he was gay, but he was sort of kept by an older woman, a rich older woman, and he got anxious about his fans thinking ill of him in this part, and he pulled out. And then they got Holden, who proved to be the perfect actor. Wilder says in the Cameron Crowe interview book, Crowe says, "What actors do you most identify with," or whatever. He says, "I love Mr. Holden. I love Mr. Holden." He said it 3 times. And then he said once to Holden in the 50s, Holden was asking his advice about buying a work of art, and he said, "Well, if I were you, and I am," you know. So he really identifies with Holden. And Joe Gillis, the struggling screenwriter, is kind of the patron saint of all of us screenwriters. I was a screenwriter for 18 years. I could talk about that, but we all relate to that guy. He is, I mean, it's so accurate, that film, but it's also kind of captures the romance of the movies in a way too, the kind of the excitement and the fun and the craziness of the movies.
And really, I mean, I think a lot of it is captured in Gloria Swanson's or Norma Desmond's house within the movie. And I mean, it's so beautifully shot. It almost looks like a prison at times because of the way that the shadows fall on the windows and the doors. Like, you know, there's moments where you can see it's like looking through the window, and it looks as if, like, you know, William Holden and Joe Gillis is in this prison.
Yeah, it's shot by John Seitz, who is a silent cameraman who worked with Valentino, who we saw in some of your wonderful clips that you assembled. And yeah, it's claustrophobic, but it was not on Sunset Boulevard. Sunset wasn't as developed as it is now, but they found a house in the Mid-Wilshire district, which was where Carla Hills grew up. She became a government official later on, but it was this grand old house that was torn down later. But the house is one of the stars of the film. It's just great. And he is like a prisoner in there, but he's desperate because his car is towed away. And Wilder said later, you know, if you believe that scene, it's because that happened to me when I was a struggling screenwriter. One of the things I write about in my book, whatever happened, Billy Wilder, Dancing on the Edge, is my new book. It's now out on Kindle, and it's coming out in hardcover in a few days. It's a critical study of his work from the beginning to the end, and I really traced all of his scripts in Germany and early Hollywood and the films he wrote and directed. And he really understood this guy, Joe Gillis, who was pounding the pavement trying to sell scripts, because Wilder, it's kind of forgotten, but he went through a period of several years in Hollywood where he was really desperate and living in the ladies' room, he said, at the Chateau Marmont, and women would come in and pee and all that while he was trying to sleep on a cot in the ladies' room. You know, things. He has great stories about that. So he really knew what it was like to be a desperate screenwriter. And one of the jobs he had in his early life was a producer paid him $50 to show up at a party and jump into the pool fully clothed just to entertain people, you know, which is humiliating. But so Joe Gillis, there's a great line in the narration where he says, the poor dope, he always wanted a pool, and, you know, now he's got a pool, but he's lying dead in the pool. It's very daringly narrated by a dead man, which was unusual at the time, very unusual. It was later done in American Beauty rather well. But Wilder came up with that as a kind of partly an accident, because it started with him dead, and he's narrating as a dead man, and you see his body being picked up by the guys from the morgue and the police, and they take it downtown. You can see a few snippets of that on one of the DVDs, and people laughed at that at previews because he's lying there in the morgue, and he's with a bunch of other ordinary people, and they all get up and start telling their stories and sharing how they got to be dead. And the audience thought that was ludicrous, so he cut that out. He was sitting at a preview in, I think, Rochester, New York. He went out in the lobby. He was so upset. He was like this, and some lady walked by and she said, "You ever seen such a piece of crap in your life?" And Wilder said, "No, I haven't, man." And so he cut that out, but then he was left with, it starts out with the guy dead. But it's a great opening with him floating in the pool, and then he basically says, "Do you want to see how I got like this?" One of the things I think is very charming about the film is that he gets to narrate the film. He gets to tell his own story. He rewrites his life as a movie script, basically. Wilder is giving this poor guy one more chance to write a film, a big A production.
And it kind of, I mean, the way that Wilder, I think, relates to this character is kind of the opposite of what you guys were talking about with Capra, where Capra kind of lied about his entry even into the film industry, being like, I suddenly like came into the film industry and directed a film, and like, I was this genius from day one. And when you were writing that book, you later found out that like he had basically worked his way up and done all of these, smaller jobs in different film crews, and then eventually, became a director, which I think is something that Wilder is incredibly honest about in all the interviews that I've watched with him.
Yeah, Wilder was an honest man. I mean, he was a newspaper guy from way back, and he believed in telling the truth. That's one reason I admire him, is he did exposés on film. Truffaut once said you can tell a director's prior occupations by the films he makes. And Wilder was kind of like an investigative journalist all his life, doing exposés of Hollywood and one thing or another. And like the newspaper business and Ace in the Hole, he does an expose of that. And I like that about him being an old newspaper guy. I related to him immediately. I've been a newspaper guy since the 60s. And I met Wilder on the set of the Front Page. I've been writing about him now for 51 years, but I went on the set of the Front Page and spent the day with him and had a wonderful time. And but he Capra, I call these directors' creation myths. Most of them have a myth, like Spielberg claims he found an empty office at Universal and set that up. It's just not true. I disproved that in my book. I think it's much more admirable what Capra did. He started out literally cleaning up the horse shit, is what he told me finally. But when I interviewed Capra for over a year for my book, the game I played was I had to find out the information from other people, and then he would confirm it and expand on it. So I met a guy from his neighborhood, his next neighbor, Rocky Washington, who became the first black lieutenant in the LA Police Department, a really great guy. And he said, "Oh, we were in the neighborhood. We were all very excited to hear that Capra got a job at a movie studio, and he was just a janitor, but we thought." So I told her, and I said, "Oh yeah, I was just cleaning up the horse shit at the Christie Brothers Company." But he worked as an assistant director, cameraman, actor, writer, gag writer, and he even developed film. He made documentary films, all these things before he supposedly walked in the door in San Francisco in 1921 and said, "Hi, I'm a Hollywood director." It's just nonsense. That really slights the profession of director, because you really have to do a lot of work to prepare for it. I tell my students that, but also it's a form of self-aggrandizement. I'm such a genius, I could just walk in the door and make a film. But Wilder didn't do that. Wilder paid his dues. He was a journalist for a long time in Vienna and Berlin. And then he was a journeyman screenwriter in Germany. And I tried to see all the films that I could, and I wrote about those. They're very interesting. He was frustrated because it was the time when Hitler was coming and the German industry was being taken over by far-right forces, so he had to struggle against that. And then he had to flee Hitler, and he went to France, and then he came to Hollywood, and the films he made in Hollywood early on were even worse than the films he was working on in Germany for a few years, until he met Charles Brackett, who was his first important collaborator, who worked with him on Sunset Boulevard. They started in 1936, and they kept going through Sunset Boulevard in 1950, and then they broke up. By the way, I should mention, I'm always religious about mentioning writers. There's a third writer on the credits of Sunset Boulevard nobody ever talks about, a guy named D.M. Marshman Jr. And he was a Life magazine reporter who came to interview Brackett and Wilder. And they were telling him they were kind of stuck on this story. Hard to believe, their original idea for Sunset Boulevard was Mae West would be this kind of crazy old star, and she'd fall in love with Marlon Brando, who was this young guy. It was supposed to be a comedy, and obviously it changed a lot. But Marshman came in, and he said, well, why not have the older lady keep the young guy as a kind of, kept man gigolo character? Suddenly the whole movie came. So in other words, Marshman thought of the whole movie. Asked Wilder, why did this guy get credit? Well, he thought of this thing. And Wilder, as people do in Hollywood, they kind of say, oh, he just thought of this and that. Well, that was the whole movie. Marshman never wrote another screenplay. He has a couple of credits on IMDb for TV versions of Sunset Boulevard, but he died a few years ago, and his daughter said he was just really super proud of having working on that film. But he really made a major contribution.
And originally the Mae West and Marlon Brando one was supposed to be a Goldwyn production, right?
I don't know about.
I think
Wilder was working for Goldwyn around that time, but he had a kind of mixed view of Goldwyn, who was a colorful guy who loved movies, but he was a Bulgarian and kind of hard to relate to for Wilder. But it could have been. I don't know for sure about that actually, but.
I was listening to an interview that he did in the 70s where he was breaking down all these different producers he had worked with, and I'm pretty sure it was Goldwyn that he was talking about. That he had pitched it to him, and then Goldwyn was like, "Yeah, I love the idea," and then they had dinner or something, and then a couple of days later, like he basically heard like from somebody else, like, "Oh, Goldwyn decided he went to New York and decided he hates the idea, he doesn't want to do it as a movie anymore."
Oh, okay.
And, yeah,
it's entirely possible because these things have long, complicated histories. And Brackett published some diaries a few years ago, which are very revealing. And from the very beginning in 1936, he was complaining about Billy Wilder. They really were not very compatible. Brackett was a quintessential WASP from back east, from a rich banking family, and he was a lawyer, and he went to Harvard, and he was a member of the Algonquin Roundtable, very erudite fellow.
And a Republican from the clip we just watched, where where Billy Wilder calls him Brackett the Republican.
Yeah, he was a Republican. Wilder was a liberal Democrat, a Jewish refugee from Hitler, and so they had clashes from the beginning. And temperamentally, Wilder was this mercurial guy who would wave sticks around as he paced around the office, and that drove Brackett crazy. Brackett would sit there on a couch with a pad and write things, and Wilder would spew out ideas, and that's the way Wilder liked to work. But Brackett didn't like it that Wilder was on the phone with women a lot, making dates, or that he'd have a drink at lunch, and one thing or another. So all through the diaries, he's saying, "I wish I could get rid of Billy Wilder and go off on my own," but it's sort of like a spouse in a bad relationship. They always say, "I'm going to leave the guy the next morning," and then it never happens. But finally, I found out in the diaries, it's very interesting. What finally precipitated their break was the House Committee on Un-American Activities hearings in 1947, which was the major political crisis in the history of Hollywood. Brackett was in favor of the hearings, and he thought that people had an obligation to give their political views to the government. Wilder totally disagreed. Being a refugee from a totalitarian country, he really thought he valued American freedoms. He loved America, although he saw our flaws and he criticized them in his films. But he thought that it was terrible for people like Dalton Trumbo to be asked for their political beliefs. So he and Brackett had some very bitter arguments. And basically, Wilder said, "I'm never going to work with you again." They were working on A Foreign Affair, which is a great movie, very political satire, terrific film. But they really wanted to do Sunset Boulevard. You'd wonder why they didn't just stop working together. But, I guess a lot of collaborators like Gilbert and Sullivan famously didn't get along. But they wanted to finish Sunset Boulevard. Also, I think it was a form of protective coloration for Wilder, who stuck his neck out in support of the blacklisted writers and the Committee for the First Amendment, and he was against the loyalty oath that DeMille tried to put in at the Directors Guild, and he was, for a foreign-born director, that was gutsy, and so he didn't, he partly survived because he was collaborator with Brackett, who everybody liked, and he was a conservative, and Brackett was an early president of the Screen Directors Guild, and all that, and so Wilder kind of needed some protective coloration. I think that's one reason DeMille is in Sunset Boulevard as good as he is. It's a way of neutralizing your opposition, is put the guy in the film. He comes off as a very charming, sensitive, compassionate fellow in the film, even though he turns her down. But he wasn't at all like the right-wing ogre that we read about, who had his own private detective service investigating the loyalty of Hollywood people, for example. You don't get that in the film. So Wilder kind of protected himself by having DeMille in the film too.
And I just wanted to kind of bring up, just since you brought up the 1947 hearings, Ronald Reagan was deeply tied in that. Friend of the show, since we've always kind of tie things to Reagan.
There's quite a few quite a few ways to tie Reagan to this.
I still can't find that painting I was telling you about the other a few weeks ago. I took an art history class, and there was this portrait of Ronald Reagan with a standing on like holding up like bloody dead babies, and it was all about the 1947 hearing. And I literally cannot find the artist or the painting, and I can't figure out. I may have lost a book in a move, which had that painting in it. So
caricatures of Reagan during Iran Contra and the war in El Salvador and all that. Reagan was an interesting character in that period. He was involved in the Screen Actors Guild. They had a meeting in November, actually early December '47. I got into the Directors Guild records, and I found some secret documents. Early in December, the representatives of the Guild tried to meet with the studios and try to stop the blacklist. And Reagan was arguing to stop the blacklist. He said it was unconstitutional, which was true, and is against the laws of the state of California, which is true. And yet, and also when he testified as a friendly witness, which means, not opposing the committee, he was saying that communists had the right to their opinions under the American system, the First Amendment, which is so valuable that a lot of people don't like it today because it allows you to be whatever political party you want to be, whether it's communist or fascist or whatever, as long as you're not overthrowing the government. That's the line you can't cross. But Reagan was defending communists' right to their opinion, and yet he was working as a FBI informant. T10 was his code number, and his wife Jane Wyman was an FBI informant at the same time. So he was playing this double game, like a lot of people in Hollywood did. And then once the blacklist got going, Reagan ran a clearinghouse, one of these clearing agencies, to get people back to work. JJ.
Yeah, I just wanted to add to that too. I think people forget too, that McCarthy era, there wasn't just like blacklisting. There was also, I didn't even know about this until a few years ago. There was the whole issue of people getting graylisted. Like I didn't realize that Vincent Price was graylisted for being a pre-war anti-Nazi. Yeah. So I mean, there was even people being graylisted, I guess.
The gray list sounds like a Vincent Price movie.
Yeah,
Right.
great. Kafkaesque. When I lived in Hollywood, I didn't know much about it. I was very naive until I got to Hollywood. And one thing I found very quickly, and it's even worse today, is Hollywood is terrified of controversy and political issues. I mean, they'll make films that are safe, that seem to take a stand about something but won't really rile people up. But they won't make a film like 1940 or like The Best Years of Our Lives. Those were gutsy films back in the day. Ironically, they were gutsier now. Today's movies are mostly made, the theatrical films are for the adolescent male audience, which is 12 to 24. If you're an adult who cares about characters and dialogue, you have to watch cable TV or streaming, which is, a different medium. But what happened was in the blacklist period, it wasn't just 10 people. It was initially 10 people blacklisted and went to prison. And then in 1951, they had a whole series of hearings, and there were probably about 300 people who were blacklisted. One of the fictions, James Burns, who was Truman's Secretary of State, who was the guy who principally advised him to drop the atomic bombs in Japan, became the counsel for the studios who put in the blacklist. It wasn't the government who instituted the blacklist, it was the studios to protect themselves. People forget that. And it wasn't Joe McCarthy. He didn't discover communism until 1949, really, as a big issue. And this was 47. The studios were into blacklisting. But
other friend of the show, Joseph McCarthy.
He was my senator for a while. I have some funny stories. Actually, I should say this is a funny story. When I was a kid in 1953, my father worked for the Milwaukee Journal, which was a liberal paper. And McCarthy called it the Milwaukee Daily Worker. And so they had a recall drive in 1954 against McCarthy, and the bumper stickers said "Joe must go." So my parents put that on our station wagon, and we lived in a kind of Republican suburb. And I thought they meant me because I was 7 years old. What did I know? I thought my parents were sending me a message. So I would creep out and tear the stickers off the car. And my parents thought it was our Republican neighbors. And so they put the stickers back on the car and I tear them off. And I mean, they say comedy is tragedy plus time. I now find it funny. I'm sure it wasn't funny at the time. But what finally happened was my dad put a sticker on the car and he stood in the window on his day off to watch what happened. And he saw his little son skulking around, ripping off the sticker, and he felt very bad about it. So I have a certain empathy for Joe McCarthy because he and I were being recalled at the same time. And the recall movements didn't succeed. But soon after that, the Army McCarthy hearings came and he collapsed. But
yeah, and his collapse was followed by his death in a really fucking short amount of time. Considering like how he was in his 40s, right? Like, he wasn't very old at all, and his like collapse from alcohol, like his obviously collapse from the CIA getting involved in the Army McCarthy hearings, and kind of.
Well, what his fatal mistake was, he went after the army, which is bad enough because Eisenhower was president, he was general of the armies in World War II, and he was really.
But also was terrified of him.
Well, he had an ambivalent relationship. He was trying to undercut him. Like Eisenhower is the guy who set up the TV hearings. He behind the scenes manipulated one of the networks into running the hearings, which he knew would destroy McCarthy. But he never mentioned him in public by name. He didn't think he should dignify him by name. Like Biden doesn't mention Trump by name. He says the former president. But Eisenhower could have done more. But he did something. But the point I was going to make was, at the Army McCarthy hearings in the great film Point of Order, which I recommend. McCarthy says he's going after the CIA next, and in American history, if you do that, that's it for you. But there were about 300 people blacklisted in Hollywood. We don't know the exact number because what James Burns told the studios was, deny there's a blacklist because it's illegal, but if you just deny it, we can get away with it. So even in the 70s, some friends of mine did a documentary called Hollywood on Trial, and they had Ronald Reagan in it. And they showed up at his office on Wilshire Boulevard at 9 a.m. and he was fully dressed, and he had an American flag and a California flag behind him, and he was fully in makeup and everything. And he says, there was no blacklist. This to me is like Holocaust denial. It's bad enough to be a Holocaust survivor, let's say, but to be told it didn't happen must be really painful. But anyway, so there were about 300 people, as far as we know, who were really blacklisted. And then there were a lot of people who were graylisted, who were kind of iffy. And they had to do things like write letters to the studios. I've seen some of these letters by people like John Houseman and Rita Hayworth, saying, I'm sorry for my premature anti-fascist opinions, and I'm sorry for belonging to this group. But
that's like such a dystopian. That's like such a dystopian phrase. Premature anti-fascist opinion.
Yeah, it's very Orwellian.
Yeah.
So Wilder, as far as we know, he wasn't directly affected by the blacklist, except his films in the 50s, he kind of retreated into safe properties for a few years. He started making films based on Broadway plays. But he did allegorical films, like Ace in the Hole is an attack primarily on the press, but you could read it as an attack on the corruption in the country because of blacklisting and the Cold War. And then Stalag 17, which is set in World War II, which was a safe subject by then. It's about informing. It's about the American POWs. I think one of the guys is an informer. And so that's a lot of Hollywood films in the 50s are very interesting because they dealt with themes like betrayal and informing, but they had to do it in subterfuge ways in Westerns and other genres. But anyway, Sunset Boulevard came right in the midst of all that. And there was a poisonous atmosphere in Hollywood, which I think contributed to that film because it's a very vitriolic film about Hollywood to some extent. And you guys know the story about Louis B. Mayer. It's worth reminding our viewers, right? They had a screening at Paramount. Louis B. Mayer was the most important person in Hollywood for a long time, but his power was slipping at MGM and he was on the way out. But at the end of the screening, as Wilder walked out, Mayer was holding court in the Paramount lobby with a bunch of his stooges, and he was railing. Wilder gave different accounts, but the gist of it was, this fellow Wilder, he was an immigrant, and we gave him a home, and we pulled him out of the water, and now he's attacking us, and how dare he do this? He's exposing our dirty linen, and we should throw him back in the ocean and send him back where he came from, blah, 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 blah. And Wilder very bravely walked over to him and said, "Mr. DeMille, I'm Billy Wilder. I made this picture, I'm sorry, not Mr. DeMille, Mr. Mayer." And he said, "Mr. Mayer, you can go fuck yourself," which I thought was great.
Yeah, and that's a story he got a lot of play out of later in his career when getting interviewed about the studio system and his way of standing up to it. But I think it took a lot of it took getting to a point where he could make something like Sunset Boulevard to have the courage to turn around and then go tell someone like Mayer to go fuck himself.
Yeah, it's when he said it's a Valentine to me, he was kind of saying, well, it's not completely an attack on Hollywood. There's some of the romance of Hollywood is in it. The Gloria Swanson character. One of the ironies today, from the feminist point of view, is that she's only a 49-year-old woman and she's portrayed as like really old. And fortunately today, Meryl Streep and Judi Dench and Viola Davis, people like that, are still bankable. But in that period, women were kind of finished a lot earlier. But what makes her seem really ancient is she's a representative of a dead art form, which is silent films. It seems like an ancient period. And so people have totally forgotten her, and it's really tragic. There was a story that they did a musical, Edward Lloyd Webber did a musical version of this, but before that, and Wilder was not happy about it, but Stephen Sondheim came to Wilder and said, let's do a musical at Sunset Boulevard. And Wilder said it shouldn't be a musical, it should be a grand opera because she's a dethroned queen. I love that. There's something grand and wonderful about her, even though she's crazy and she's in denial of reality. And
interestingly, Gloria Swanson wanted to be an opera singer before she wanted to be an actress.
Really? She was really tiny, right?
Yeah. The other, I need to throw this in here. The other thing that connects Reagan to this movie is that at the end of her life in her 80s, she was in her 90s, I think, when she passed away, and like a year or two before it was when Reagan had gotten elected, and she was the chairwoman of senior citizens for Reagan.
Okay.
Yeah. So
as well known with Joe Kennedy Sr. They were an item for a while in the late 20s, and they made a film together called Queen Kelly, which Erich von Stroheim directed. And he was known for being wildly extravagant, so she shuttered the production. And you see a clip from it in Sunset Boulevard. Wilder's two favorite directors were Lubitsch and Stroheim. He said his style was a kind of a strange combination of both. And so they put in this clip from her watching Queen Kelly. But she was a great character. She kind of reinvented herself as she had a TV show and she made a few films, and she was a survivor and really a fabulous woman. But Holden went on to a great career, and Wilder, he won an Oscar for Sally 17, and then he was in Fedora, which is a fascinating but flawed Billy Wilder film from the 70s, which is kind of like a reflection on Sunset Boulevard. I'd recommend people see that. It's a darker, even darker version of Sunset Boulevard. It's about the film business.
I have this clip of Gloria Swanson talking about Queen Kelly. Just as you said that, I was thinking, like, I had actually had that on the outline for the next clip. I was going to be like, here's so this is her talking about shuttering the production on it.
Oh, okay, great.
Queen Kelly is not a finished picture. The only thing that was rather difficult at the time was that he was taking longer to do 1/3 of the picture. Of course, pictures have budgets, and that means a certain length of months to shoot a picture. I happened to become worried about what was being shot, and since the two people that were being put in charge didn't seem to have any control over the situation, I walked off the set one morning after it was very early in the morning, and I had just had a cup of tea for breakfast, and went to the dressing room, my bungalow, where I lived actually, and called New York and called the bankers and said, I think you better come out here because I'm worried. Much of the stuff that we're making in this dance hall, quote, question mark, I think is censorable, and the Will Hayes office will never allow us to show it. And not only that, but we have 20,000 feet for the first third of the picture, and if we continue like this, we're going to be all year, and it's going to cost more than I wish to be responsible for. So like that. The bankers were there. They didn't have jets in those days, but they were there before I knew it, as if they'd come by their own kites or their own steam. And so as a matter of fact, I never saw von Stroheim from that day until actually we were making Sunset Boulevard.
Fascinating. Well, you can tell how smart she is and interesting, and it's fun to see.
Yeah. And also, I think there's background on that, which is after she worked for Cecil B. DeMille and did those movies, she got involved with United Artists, which, gave people the chance to, gave like big stars the chance to kind of produce their own movies. But a lot of times they would have to put up some of the capital for it themselves. Mm-hmm. So if you were working on a movie that was going to tank and go way over budget, you were kind of draining your own bank account. Which was kind of when she got involved with Joseph Kennedy Sr., like the father. He was helping her produce these films and had his banker friends kind of bankrolling some of it, but then a lot of it would come from her own bank account, and it kind of ended up actually bleeding her dry throughout this period because she was financing films that kind of either wouldn't get made or Joe Kennedy would say, "Oh well, I can help you get it around the Hays Code censors. Don't worry about that," and then she'd have to get involved with these really rigorous fights against the Hays Code people.
That kind of hurt her career. One of the oddities, her career kind of floundered around that time. But she did a film that Wilder wrote. The first credit he had after he came to Hollywood was a musical called Music in the Air, which is sort of a silly Hammerstein and Kern second-rate musical. A lot of talent was involved, but it wasn't much of a film. But she plays a diva who's appropriates this young songwriter to try to control him and make him her boy toy. And it kind of relates to Sunset Boulevard. But ironically, when Wilder approached her, she didn't remember they had ever worked together. Maybe they didn't meet. But he was able to take her performance in Music in the Air and kind of modulate it for the film. But we all love Joe Gillis. He's as I say, our patron saint because he's a struggling writer. I love the scene where he's typing in his bathrobe. Somebody once said they ran into F. Scott Fitzgerald when he was struggling to be a screenwriter. He's a great novelist, but he never quite figured out how to be a screenwriter. And he opened the door at 3:00 in the afternoon in his bathroom, and they thought that was scandalous. But that's one of the good things about being a screenwriter. In my book, Writing in Pictures, which is a handbook on how to write screenplays, I wrote that one of the good things about being a screenwriter is you can sit in your underwear and write scripts. And the editor made me take that out. He said, "Do you really want to say that in the script?" I said, "Well, yeah, the good things about being a screenwriter." But so Joe Gillis is pounding away on his typewriter, and he says, the voiceover, Wilder felt, don't use voiceover just to tell people what they're seeing. Use it to add something to the scene. So he's giving sardonic views of Hollywood throughout, and he's kind of the voice of Wilder to some extent. But he's a real formed character, and it really helps for him to make sardonic references to put it in context. But he says, I was writing all these scripts. They were originals. Some of them maybe weren't original enough. Then he pauses and says, some were too original. I can relate to that as a screenwriter. I wrote
something, honestly,
scripts.
I doubt it in Joe Gillis's case that they were too original. I feel because he seems like
the story about baseball. It's really trite. One person I'd like to talk about who's neglected in this film is Betty Schaefer, the story editor, played by Nancy Olson, who's still with us, a wonderful actress, very charming. When I was in Wisconsin, I thought she was too good to be true. You know, she's so nice and all that, and I thought she was bland. And then I came to Hollywood and I realized, well, the best people in Hollywood are these story editors who are usually bright young women in their 20s who went to some really good school and they're well read. And I became friendly with some of them because they liked my work and they were nice. You could talk to them, and then they would try to pitch my scripts to their boss, who was usually some crass older guy, and the guy would say, "Well, that's too soft." I used to hear that expression. I used to hate that. Soft meant like humane about people or whatever. You know, it wasn't like shooting each other. So Betty Schaefer is actually a very believable Hollywood character. And Wilder has a tendency, one of the things I counter in my new book, Billy Wilder, Dancing on the Edge, is this myth that he's a cynical misanthrope, you know, hatred of humanity or whatever. I think he's a disappointed romantic, is what his later collaborator I.L. Diamond called him. That he was, his heart had been broken many times in love, and I mean, he came from the Austro-Hungarian Empire collapsed, and then Nazism came, and he lived through a lot of upheavals. He was an exile over and over again. He found a home in Hollywood, but he was not a cynic. He was just a realist. I said to him once, I called him a cynic, and without thinking, and he said, "But if I'm cynical, what adjective do you have for Peckinpah pictures?" I thought that was a great call.
Oh, I wanted to put up the pictures that you sent me.
Yeah, here I was talking to him in 1995. I gave him the LA Film Critics Career Achievement Award in 1995, and so I talked to him a lot on different occasions. He was a great interview subject because he was an old reporter and he knew how to really talk to the press, and we got along well. And here I am on the set of the Front Page in 1974, looking very young and thin. And I did an interview with him. It was published in the Real paper in Boston and Sight and Sound. And I interviewed I.L. Diamond and Jack Lemmon, Walter Matthau, the cameraman and the producer. And so over the years, I got to talk to Wilder a lot. Todd McCarthy and I did a big interview with him in 1978. A lot about his later career. I love his later films. And that's one thing that people tend to neglect. He made a lot of good films with Brackett. They did Ninotchka for Lubitsch. They did Double Indemnity. He wrote with Raymond Chandler because Brackett thought it was a horrible story, but he liked the film. But they did.
There's a character that kind of reminds me of Joe Gillis in some way too, Walter Neff, like just the depression inherent kind of in it, and this style of noir where it's like the character at the center of it is not necessarily like a good person. They're kind of, you know what I mean? Like
he can deal with, well, I was saying he has good women in his films. People who are really good-hearted people, like Betty Schaefer, encourages Joe's better qualities, and then he rejects her. Unfortunately, you kind of want to scream at the screen at the end when he tells her to leave because she's his only salvation. But if he had stuck with her, she somehow manages to maintain her integrity and goodness in the midst of this cesspool of Hollywood. But quite often, his characters are struggling between corruption and trying to redeem themselves, get out of the mess they're in. And so Joe Gillis is one of those characters. He's, his car has been repossessed and he has no money, and he takes whatever job he can get as a ghostwriter for this woman, and he's humoring her, and he becomes her gigolo. Wilder in his early days was a gigolo of sorts. This is well known. There are a lot of gigolos in his films, or kept men. And he deals a lot with prostitution versus love. That's a big conflict in his films. Like, prostitution is sort of the human condition in Wilder's films, but we can surmount it by actually loving somebody. And that's the conflict in a lot of his films. But in the 20s, when he was struggling as a journalist, he was working as a tea dancer, they called it Eintanzer, at hotels with older ladies or just girls who wanted a dancing partner, and he had to pretend to be this suave dancer. And he wrote this wonderful series in 1926 called "It's All About Being a Tea Dancer," and it would make a great movie. And it's a 4-part series, and I talk about it a lot in the book. And he understood the humiliation involved in being a kept man. And so that theme keeps coming up, like in Ninotchka, which is the Lubitsch film. The character played by Melvin Douglas is a gigolo. He's very suave and very charming, and he's not particularly destroyed by it, but he has to kind of get out of it and fall in love and be his own man. And poor Joe Gillis can never quite manage it because the system, I guess what Louis B. Mayer was upset about it indicts the system of Hollywood as a soul-crushing thing. DeMille says in the film something like 20 press agents working overtime can do terrible things to the human spirit. The way they make poor Norma feel like she's a complete failure and worthless person when she should be reveling in her grandeur. If she were around today, she'd be honored at film festivals and stuff, but back then they didn't have that.
Yeah. This actually lines up perfectly with this last clip that I wanted to play, and then Andy has a question quickly about Rock and Roll High School that he is going to tie into this. But so I wanted to wrap it up pretty, so you can get off when you need to. But this is quickly. This is just a minute of Billy Wilder talking about how he wanted to originally end this movie, and it plays into the same quote that you just said about yeah.
Finish the story.
The Sunset Boulevard had that thing, you know, the pool and getting it, and then was no other ending except it's being shot. The daring thing was that after the murder and the police and all of that thing, and one character I could not get in, because that would have been wonderful. That the newspaper people are there and telephoning, and on one phone I had Hedda Harper, on the other phone I wanted to have what's the name of the other gossip woman? Start with who? Luella Parsons. And she's on the upper phone, lower phone. Get off here, you bitch! I could not get her because she knew that Hedda Harper was an experienced actress. But no executive would come and say, "Now, just a second. I mean, is there going to be a lawsuit? Is she going to be arrested? Is she going to be in jail?" I said, "I have no idea. All I know is she's Miss Sugar. That's all. That's the ending. She talks to the audience."
Yeah, so I don't know. That ending makes a lot more sense in that context, I think, because she's sitting, Hedda Hopper's sitting on the bed, and she's like, "Oh, I'm more important as the press," and I think it would have made way more sense if the two of them had gone at it. And
the callousness of the press again. Hedda Hopper as the actor who played Chief Scar on The Searchers, Henry Brandon. I interviewed him about John Ford, and he said Hedda and Ward Bond ran the Hollywood blacklist, and he says if you do that to a cowboy, you'd get hung. I love that quote. They were terrible people, and Hedda Hopper was one of the worst, and so she's a real viper in the film. But yeah, she's Meshuggah. He puts in these Yiddish terms. Later, his films are about becoming a mensch or a man. I.L. Diamond, I like his films that he wrote with Diamond later after he tried a few other collaborators, and then he settled with I.L. Diamond, who was very simpatico with him and made a lot of great films in his later years, Private Life of Sherlock Holmes, Avanti, etc. That's another story, as they say in the Wilder scripts. But Sunset Boulevard is a perfect film. It's one of those great masterpieces.
Yeah.
I was going to say, you cover the Private Life of Sherlock Holmes in the book, right?
Yeah. And I have a long section on Fedora, which is fascinating as a kind of final reflections on Hollywood. Very, very bitter film because he had been rejected by Hollywood. He and Diamond were kicked to the street, basically kicked to the gutter. Sunset Boulevard begins in the gutter, I mean, that's his vision, and then it moves up from the gutter and take it from there. But yeah, I deal a lot with the later films, which I try to champion. I've done that since the 70s when they came out. I've been trying to say, no, he's making great films in this period as well. And it's not just, let's look back at the 40s and 50s. He had a long, rich career. So that's one reason this book is just long. It's hard to even lift it. It's about 700 pages. Hopefully fun to read because I go into all the ups and downs of his amazing career in Germany, Vienna, Poland, before that, France, Hollywood, and then he went back to Europe to make films later on when Hollywood kind of rejected him. He became a European filmmaker again. He like Lubitsch, he was one of those directors who interpreted America to Europe and Europe to America. He brought a cosmopolitan spirit to our films. That's one reason Sunset Boulevard holds up so well. It's extremely sophisticated and very tolerant, and it's very compassionate toward Norma, even though she's kind of a tyrant and she's crazy.
Even though she's Meshuggah.
Yeah, you feel deeply for her. She's a tragic queen, as he says, and you feel deeply for Holden too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I just
Andy,
this is actually a great transition to my question because I kind of feel like Billy Wilder is like a lot like Alex Cox, which we've had a discussion about punk filmmaking, and of course you wrote Rock and Roll High School, and since we never like the Lubitsch touch, we never quite defined what punk filmmaking actually was, although Lubitsch touch has a better definition. It just has a bunch of them. So I just kind of was wondering, since we've had earlier discussions on this channel about punk filmmaking, and you wrote a movie which I would argue was more into the post. What was that movie? The one that Lucas did. No, I was thinking more like the 70s nostalgic teen style that kind of gave us eventually Animal House and
it's American Graffiti. Joseph,
American Graffiti, yes.
Yeah, that was a wonderful movie, but it was kind of wholesome and fun, whereas
but like it kind of created the formula that like later movies like Porky's and Animal House kind of filled in, and I think Rock and Roll High School kind of sits in that kind of camp. But anyways, like what your thoughts about punk filmmaking are, and if we could maybe just in general as the channel have a better definition.
Well, making a movie with Roger Corman. I'm sorry.
Roger Corman and the Ramones, by the way, just to add that in there if people don't know what we're talking about.
The Ramones make that film special. I mean, it's a film that has never stopped playing. And my son a few years ago said, Dad, the only thing about this film that dated is vinyl. But vinyl's come back, so hey, But the Ramones, it was a stroke of genius to get the Ramones as the band. When I wrote the script, we didn't know who the band would be. And the Ramones, I like them because they hark back to the very earliest days of rock and roll, which I was into from 1955. But they were very sophisticated songwriters, and they dealt with subjects that the mainstream didn't want to deal with, like glue sniffing and child abuse and things. So they had trouble getting played on radio, and so they never were destined to be a mainstream success, which is partly what I like about them. That's partly why they're authentic punk. As punk is an outsider. Rebel medium, and once you become mainstream, which they tried with Phil Spector and it bombed, they tried to do an album where they cleaned up and it just died. And but they were a cult favorite. They're cult favorites, and they still are. And that's what makes the film really work. But I think the characters are good. It's based on a student strike my father ran in 1928 at his high school in Superior, Wisconsin. But I always kind of held it in reserve as a film idea, but I thought it was a little mild for the 70s until I thought of ending with a violent thing where they blew up the school, which I based on the students in 1970 when I was in Madison, Wisconsin, blew up the Army Math Research Center to protest the Vietnam War, and they killed a graduate student, unfortunately. And I covered that event, and so I thought, let's put in something serious and make it a serious political satire in the midst of all the silliness. And it isn't. The material I was handed originally to rewrite was just silly. So I thought, let's add some political overtones. And also my background as a Catholic school kid, I really understood fascist, repressive nuns and priests. And so Mary Warrenoff's character, the principal, resonates with people because she's so true as a disciplinarian. Anyway, that was a fun film. A lot of people worked on that. I was one of the writers. It was one of those classic collaborations that the parts were all came together in a kind of unexpected way, and I'm glad you like it. And one thing, there was a book on Hollywood musicals in the 70s, came out in the 90s, and I saw it at the bookstore, and I thought, oh, great. And I looked at the contents. Rock and Roll High School is not even mentioned. And I'm not saying it's cabaret, but it's a good movie. But it was so far outside the mainstream. It was made for $280,000 by Roger Corman that it didn't even count in the minds of conventional people. And that's typical of like Orson Welles not counting in the minds of conventional people because he wasn't working in the mainstream superhero kind of movies. But I like people who work on the margins. I think that's some of the best filmmaking that endures.
Yeah, and I think that's why Orson Welles has endured as long as he has. Working outside of a studio system that was really being, repressive at the time, to the point where if you pissed one or two people off, like, you were done for, like your career was over.
Yeah, and I think too, the working in the margins is a good partial definition of what punk filmmaking is.
Hey, I just wanted to say real quick, Joseph, I'm glad you mentioned Mary Warrenoff, because as much as the Ramones make that film, Mary Warrenoff is my queen. So her being in that movie, I don't think anyone should sell her short. And she was punk before punk. She was a Warhol Factory girl.
Yeah, she's amazing. She's really tall and imposing and witty and sophisticated, and she really nails that character. And I play one of her henchmen. I was a school board member. I had no lines. And I was an extra in some films. And I once asked an old extra, how do you get noticed in a scene? He said two things. Stand next to the person who has the dialogue in the scene. Stand next to the tallest person in the shot, because the camera will gravitate toward them. So I figured, okay, Mary Warnoff, she's my height, 6'3". She had the lines. I stood next to her, and she kept kind of looking at me, and then I'd look at her, and we'd give each other evil looks, and it became like a little shtick, especially in the film. But it is one of those films in which many disparate talents pooled the resources, and it was kind of an unlikely success. But yeah, I mean, Billy Wilder too, I like him because he is a maverick. He was always a maverick. And he worked within the mainstream system, though. He wanted to be successful and popular, and he succeeded, had a long career. And then they kind of kicked him out the door when youth films came in, and he couldn't quite adapt. And that's a sad part of it. But he didn't let it destroy him. He just, moved on to other things. But he challenged our system. He challenged the American way of life, and he challenged our conventional views of men and women and humanity.
And then got weirdly nostalgic for the system that he had kind of departed from towards the end. If you listen to any of his screenwriting, like, his classes on screenwriting, or lectures on screenwriting that he gave, he gets all weirdly nostalgic for old Hollywood. He'll be like, no, I think we should, this was really where I shined, and but it's like,
ironically, I did a book called The Book of Movie Lists, and I had one list, 10 reasons why the studio system was bad, 10 reasons why the studio system was good. And it's encapsulated by John Huston saying, when we worked in the studio system, we all kept saying, we wish the studio system would be destroyed because we'd have freedom. And then it was destroyed, and we didn't have that freedom. And we realized, hey, it wasn't so bad after all. And guys like Wilder and Lubitsch and Huston and other people worked in the system rather well, but they had to be very clever to outwit censorship, which Lubitsch, Wilder.
But I mean, if you're going based on what's good and what's bad about the studio system, it kind of made some of the most ingenious filmmaking because it had to get past that censorship. Like look at, like as the Hays Code kind of crushed a lot of creativity, the creativity actually bloomed again because people had to be creative enough to get it past the censorship.
Yeah, they had to be clever. And in my Lubitsch book, How Did Lubitsch Do It?, I have a whole final chapter on romantic comedies today, which I think are kind of dismal compared to Lubitsch's. Part of it is the old restrictions are broken down, so you can do almost anything. You can have people taking a dump on the street, and that terrible film Bridesmaids, and then follow it. Actually, there are two scenes in a row where they do that, which Wilder called humpback construction, which means you have the same thing happen in two successive scenes. But Lubitsch didn't do that, and Wilder didn't do that. They had to be more subtle and sophisticated, and that's why those films hold up better than a lot of that silly stuff. And that's why we look back. I wish younger people, I'm teaching a class later today on Wilder and Lubitsch, and I'm showing Sunset Boulevard, oddly enough. And when I show these films to students, they think, wow, these are wonderful films. These guys were way ahead of their times. And Lubitsch they love, and Wilder they really love. I think Wilder is a little more troubling for people because he's maybe a little more close to us in terms of time. But they find them very sophisticated compared to the garbage that they're dealt today, frankly.
Yeah, I first saw Sunset Boulevard, wow, because of a noir class I took my last semester of college, and we watched 14 noir films in 14 weeks, and both Double Indemnity and Sunset Boulevard were in there. Oddly enough, as a kid, my dad and I watched Some Like It Hot a bunch of times because we had gotten it from a DVD store, and we ended up watching it like 5 times. But I'm gonna let you go because you have office hours, so I don't want to.
I'm a teacher. That's my gig, and but I like it because being a teacher, you talk to young people and you show them films and you get them excited about classic films, and then you can write about them at the same time. So today I'm doing my Lubitsch Wilder class, which is great. Next week I'm showing some Lubitsch German films. I'm going back and forth between the two guys. They're very different but very similar. But now I've written books on both of them. And it's kind of a natural progression. My next book is on the Coen brothers, who I love. And to me, they're the modern equivalents of Billy Wilder. If he were working today, he'd be making films.
Yeah. And there's the connection between Tilda Swinton playing both like kind of the Hedda Hopper character and Luella Parsons in
they're very strict toward Hollywood. They're very wicked and funny satirists, but they kind of love people. They call their characters in an affectionate way morons. They love morons because our country is full of about half morons, and we always have been actually. But so not all their characters are morons. Like the dude is not a moron; he's a very clever guy. But a lot of the characters are very wacky. But they're kind of the heirs of Billy Wilder in today's world. So it's kind of a natural progression. So anyway, I hope people will get this book, which is coming out from Amazon on September 24th. And it's already out on Kindle, by the way, if people are interested in buying it now. But I spent 12 years off and on writing that and 50 years writing about Billy Wilder. So it's a dream come true for me because I just love Billy Wilder's films to distraction. I think he's such a great filmmaking marvel, and I hope people get a kick out of it. But I really delve into what makes him tick and what some of the mysteries are in his life and work, and I hope that people will find that illuminating.
Yeah, and I hope you'll come back if we do another Billy Wilder film in the future.
Or Coen Brothers film.
Yeah.
That book is coming out in March. It's called The Whole Darn Human Comedy, Life According to the Coen Brothers, which is that line from Sam Elliott at the beginning of Big Lebowski, and The Whole Darn Human Comedy. And so I would love to talk to you guys again. It's always fun, and you guys have great questions. Thank you so much.
All right. Yeah. Thanks for coming on. And we're gonna premiere this at 8 tonight, or probably at 9 tonight when we finish our first stream on it. But yeah.
Cool.
So I'll send it to you when we do.
Thank you, guys.
All right.
Gabba gabba hey for the Ramones. Yeah.
Don't we love it, folks? Watching ourselves on stream. Don't we love it?
I even though I was in the interview, I still got so much out of it the second time through. It was I enjoyed that.
And we're watching Conan.
Muted Conan.
We're watching Conan at full casual attire.
And muted.
Yeah. And don't we love it, folks? Sunset Boulevard.
Wait, did Conan actually say something? Because we didn't hear him.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't think he was ready. I think I just threw him on screen without him being ready to be on screen.
Oh. Nothing's coming out, man.
Look at Gloria Swanson over there.
We broke Conan.
Just talk, and I'll fill in the background.
Talk.
No need.
There we
go. Perfect.
Yeah, I didn't have my stuff plugged in. I didn't have my lighting on. I was writing up a Letterboxd review. I was doing all the things.
Yeah, I did my first Letterboxd review. Oh, Master
For Sunset Boulevard.
I think I'm your first like. So.
I don't even know what I am on Letterboxd. I'm on.
I think a lot of people don't.
I'm moving at Extravaganza.
Oh, it turns out I'm Jay Hutch.
Hold on, Matthew Film Guy. Matthew Film Guy to come back on. Everybody got all this stuff. I wasn't planning to go back on, but then I felt like I don't know. I didn't want to just leave it at that, and I think I'm going to premiere the just the video of us with Joseph McBride tomorrow as like its own standalone thing. I had so much fun in that conversation though. I really I've been like a pretty big Orson Welles fan for a ridiculous amount of time. I mean, I've even seen like I've even heard his like old RKO radio, like his what I mean, like the radio player stuff that he did way back. Like I mean, obviously I think everyone's heard War of the Worlds when he did that, but like I don't know, it's just fascinating that he turned that
Tom Cruise.
No, but it's fascinating that he turned like that radio, like a radio drama career kind of into financing a film career. And he like just as we were talking about with Joseph McBride, like he was always on the margins.
But according to Buckaroo Banzai, that actually happened.
The War of the Worlds?
Yeah.
The Invasion?
Yeah, The Adventures of Buckaroo Banzai Across the Eighth Dimension.
I haven't seen it. I know the movie, but I haven't seen it. The Invasion
got
happens in the movie?
Yeah, it's great.
Oh.
It's yeah, no.
And as we determined, the initial script for the sequel kind of turned into Big Trouble in Little China,
Right.
right?
Oh, yeah, yes. I saw that.
As astute viewers of the show will know.
I can tell you. I was watching.
As people remember with the callback to Tuesday.
Yeah, that was Tuesday, huh?
Yeah.
I was in a different state. I was in a different state of mind. It's a whole thing.
Yeah, you were in the Pork Chop Express.
Exactly. Broadcasting live, coming at you.
It is crazy though. Orson Welles makes Citizen Kane. You think after making a movie like Citizen Kane, you'd be able to have carte blanche for the rest of your career, but he struggles to make movies for the rest of his career.
Well, I mean, as we were talking about with Joe, like he kind of he's on the margins his whole career. You know what I mean? Like he really never has that full studio hookup, which really is the only way that you can make these kinds of films at the time.
Yeah.
So, there are times. I think there are times that he definitely does. It's really interesting with Touch of Evil that he is Charlton Heston, playing like a Mexican guy. But another movie that I really really love with Orson Welles in it is The Third Man. Like I absolutely love that movie. And he doesn't
Transformers the movie.
His swan song.
The Third Man is not something directed by Orson Welles. He's just acting in it, and
neither is Transformers the movie.
But what a scene with the Ferris wheel! Like I said, when I finally saw Before Sunset, which was relatively recently, I might add, like right before I left to record this last record, I realized that they shot a scene that's like, I was like, why does this seem so familiar? I'm like, oh, it's The Third Man. It's like when he's doing the whole thing in the Ferris wheel car. Like it's so iconic. It's such a cool movie, man.
If I could have grabbed anything for the theme song to this, I would have every time this show's about to come on, I go and I would just get that stuck in people's heads, like because it's been stuck in my head since I was in college and saw that movie the first time. Like literally, it's been the only song that's like stuck in my head the entire time.
That is a crazy theme song. Like it seems incongruous at first. And then it's just entirely tied to the movie from that point on.
Yeah, and it's also that style of guitar is played throughout the entire movie, like freestyle, which is insane. What other movie soundtrack do you know that was like is that certain
Dead Man?
Yeah, it's just I don't know.
That's really the only other one that came to mind.
Yeah.
Hey man, that's a great soundtrack, and that's basically Neil Young fucking around and playing the guitar to the movie. But it's Neil Young and it's fucking genius.
You guys ever see Triplets of Bellevue?
It's Triplets of Bellevue.
Belleville, but that's fine. My job is to correct you.
Triplets of Belleville, yeah.
The Chimps
you love your work.
Belleville.
Pleasure.
No, so
the French film.
Yeah.
The French animated one?
Yeah.
I am a huge fan of Betty Boniface, who won an Academy Award for that soundtrack.
After listening to that style of stuff, my parents when I was a kid got really into Django Reinhardt. They were listening to a bunch of
Django.
They were listening to
different Django.
No, so the first theme song that we had, the first the first 8 shows or something. Was what I thought was what said it was a public domain Django Reinhardt just like the finger picking, and I thought it was, and then all of a sudden I found out that I guess recording wasn't technically public domain, and we kept getting flagged for it. But the first
you heard from his estate and they said otherwise.
That damn gypsy keeps coming after you.
Litigious gypsies, yes.
but I don't know. So I thought that was interesting because I was I remember really liking the first edition of the before I found before I found that on, I don't remember if it was on the public domain one or the theme song we have right now. But the first one was Now You're, it's something like Now You're Gone. or something by Django Reinhardt was the first 8-episode theme song. And then Conan was supposed to make a personalized one for us, and it hasn't happened
fuck,
yet.
you're right, I was.
Yeah,
That's what he was doing when the stream started again.
Yeah, exactly. I was real busy doing that. Exactly. That's I still
This
will.
This was the subtle reminder that you're working on it.
I just like your a cappella versions. If you could just put a little reverb on that.
Put some Beavis and Butthead in it,
I don't know. I've always been really jealous that Ben nabbed something that Cole had just made and had on in his archive or whatever, because he's back to making music now, and you know what I mean. Like I feel like if I ask Cole for a track, I'll owe him forever.
This is like the inside baseball portion of the show. It's like, how does the show get made?
I was gonna say it's pretty insular. I did say I would actually write you one. I meant it. I just haven't had time to do it yet.
Yeah, I'm 100% down for that.
I know Dad takes. I got this one musician I want to work with, but like during the summer.
Jay Hutch killing it in the text form. Sorry.
See, it's my strength. Somebody can just read it out now if you want.
Just
in his preferred format of choice, he's killing it.
By the way, when I said the thing about theme song earlier, I was referencing who the fuck was on the episode when I did this? I guess I played the Pokemon one the other day with us, but there was the James Austin Johnson one where he did Scooby Doo, and he said, "And they don't make good theme song anymore."
You did do the song from Straight to Hell one episode.
Salsa, eat ketchup, eat salsa, eat ketchup. No, but the other day I played it was Varn. It was when you went to do Bad Takes, and Varn was left on, and Kenzo. That's who was on. And at the end of the episode, we had gone for over 2 hours, and I just randomly, I knew they wanted to get off, but I wanted to fuck with them, so I turned on the James Austin Johnson Trump video where he was like, "Scooby Doo, Scooby Doo," and I could see both Varn and Kenzo itching to get off the stream, and I was like.
Yeah, because I just bounced. I just said my closing thoughts and just bounced.
Years and years ago, when I was a much younger man, I worked at Tower Records, so that should tell you how long it is, and there always were people that would come in 5 minutes before the end of right before we have to close. Oh no, I just want one thing, and then they would, and then all right, and you see them go over and they'd be flip, flip, flip. I'm like, this motherfucker. And so my secret move was always to play, and I'm not even kidding, as loud as the sound system would go, Wesley Willis. Top volume.
We like salesmen. We like salesmen.
and it was great. And for those not familiar, outsider artist, notable in style in the fact that all of his background music was basically presets on a keyboard with a preset fill, and he would always put a tagline of some commercial at the end of it. I mean, my favorite is the Batman one is pretty great. I kicked Batman's ass. He was a total asshole. It's like, and I would play that.
It makes Ween look like Beethoven.
Yes, and I would play it at maximum volume, and it was as if somebody said, "This record store is on fire," and then they would get out immediately.
Forrest, one of my favorite moments in Give Them an Argument is that I think it was a season-ending episode where you desperately had to go to the bathroom and Ben wouldn't end the show.
Yeah, that was sadistic on Ben's part. I kept messaging him. First, I kept messaging him, and I was like, "Oh, I gotta get off," and he just wouldn't let me. And then I started just being on camera, yeah, I guess I gotta get off and just run real quick. And he's like, no, listen, it was 25 more minutes of a.
It was great.
And then I did the most inspired rant of my podcasting career. I went on that TSA rant where I was yelling into the microphone about how certain people in certain people on the left just have incredibly alienating behavior, and I just kind of went, and then all of a sudden I kept seeing people in the chat being like, "Yeah, dude, preach, hell yeah!" And I was like, "I really gotta pee, and I don't want to keep going."
What you need is a podcasting cup next to your desk, so
Yeah.
you don't have to stop.
You were like Blutowski, giving his speech, his inspiring speech in that film. Senator Blutowski, of course, I'm talking about.
Yes.
How's that puppy doing, Forrest?
I mean,
where is he right now?
She's downstairs in my grandma's bathroom because she wasn't. I don't know. They said that she's gonna get really overwhelmed if I just let her run throughout the house. It's probably good.
Yeah.
Let me tell you.
Literally, if this is the puppy corner, literally what we did with our puppy the first week is we just had a leash tied to our belt and just kept him on our leash right with us. So he's right there if he did anything. Or lock him in a bathroom. I don't know. Either way, one or the other. There may be two approaches to this. I don't know.
Sounds fine.
I mean, it's probably not traumatizing him any more than the storm and everything. But
well, they said
be careful
because she's been in a kennel for her entire life. Like they thought that maybe the first couple days because she just got spayed 2 days ago.
Oh so, wow, that's a lot. That's a lot.
So, spayed or she got speed? What was it?
Well, I
get her out of that bathroom.
Well,
next thing you know, she's starting a remake of Crank.
Well, I gave her some of my Adderall script, but that's not what I was talking.
Yeah. No, when I got my cat,
a dog can't even have a cup of coffee.
Yeah, I know. I wouldn't actually give a dog Adderall. Don't worry.
Okay. I had to check.
Thank you for clarifying that.
I just had to check. I wasn't going to take that chance, but go on.
Cancel culture's out of control.
When I first got my cat,
I heard Forrest Miller likes to feed speed to dogs.
My cat literally spent 2 hours, like the first time she was out of her cage because we got her from a center, and she just spent 2 hours just running in a circle around the house. It's like, I don't know if we got the right cat, but after she got that out of her system, she was cool.
To be fair, I do that too when I come back.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know. I had my 2 cats for the longest time, and then I broke up with my ex-girlfriend, and she took the cats, and haven't seen my cat since, or my rabbit. But so I mean, having a puppy is probably gonna help my mood a lot. But no. So I honestly though, this puppy reminds me of the first cat that I had gotten, who also both this puppy and the cat had these anxiety problems, which I do too, but I don't know, they kind of behave in a similar way. So it's been kind of comforting being this, this puppy kind of when I first held her in my arms, she was shaking because she's just been through so much, I think. And I was taking care of her, and all of a sudden she stopped shaking. And I was I feel like this is.
May I suggest Sunset Lake CBD for pets? Use the coupon code majority for 10%. No, but I actually did because of Sam Cedars hawking that stuff. I bought a ton of it, and it works great for my dog. He sometimes gets seizures, and it's kept him really well taken care of. But for anxiety,
dogs tend to do well, I think, with the CBD stuff. I've tried giving cats the cat CBD treats. It seems to just be a scam. But
oh yeah,
I just I guess how do you really know that a cat has taken CBD? The cats are so weird anyway.
You ever see them on Nip?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I guess if they're not running around in a circle.
No, my cats lick the walls and the floor and everything whenever they're on.
Are your cats on LSD?
Your dogs are tweakers? What is this?
Yes.
One of our cats has massive OCD. That's scientific fact. That's not a theory. And it's always, he gets major separation anxiety, so it's always hard when I go on tour, I go out to record, because I just feel in the back of my mind, I'm like, oh, Jack's probably kind of bummed out right now. And sure enough, he is. But I've definitely noticed, give him a little catnip. He does some cat flips and runs around for a while and forgets his troubles for a minute or two.
Well, my youngest kitten that I have with my ex-girlfriend, Petunia, that would always come on when I was on give them an argument, it would just come and try to rip down the fucking mural because she wanted attention so badly. And it was really funny because there was this one stream where you could just see her behind me, trying to rip down the mural behind me. But she started turning into a catnip fiend. And I thought it was the funniest thing in the world. I would sprinkle a little bit of catnip and her behavior would completely change because she would go from being this little sweet, innocent cat to all of a sudden just being just everywhere, jumping around like she was fucking possessed.
Oh yeah, it's like feline reefer madness. Like it's a real thing.
The cat's got to learn how to handle her high.
I'm fiending for it. I'll murder my friends to get it. You know. Okay.
Calm down a little bit.
Don't
Don't let them know you want nip that badly. Jesus.
On that
good
nip?
luck with it, Forrest. How is it a puppy? Like, is it just a puppy to you?
No, I mean she's 4 months old, so she's.
Oh yeah, that's a puppy.
Yeah. And she's. I think she's. I don't know how big she's gonna get because I don't know what obviously the mix is because she's a hound, which probably is gonna get pretty big, and then something else, and they don't quite know what the other thing is.
She's something other than just a hound dog.
Yeah, she's like a hound mix, but you can tell she's a hound, like you know what I mean, and you can tell that she's gonna get big. Her paws are already big, but it's just so cute to like watch her like realize that she's a hound because obviously she's been in a shelter for the longest time. So like when you're in a shelter, you don't really get to run around and like put your nose to the ground and try to figure out like what things smell like. So it's just so cute for the last day and a half to like watch her put her nose to the ground, not know what the fuck she's smelling because she hasn't been outside, but she's like tracking something.
Thank you, J. Hutch.
And something other than a hound dog.
I was on a delayed fuse. This is still going out to like the public?
Yeah.
Okay.
Nobody's watching.
I think they need to hear this personally.
This is the extravaganza part of the movie night.
I'm probably gonna cut the interview that we did with Joseph McBride as its own thing, and then I'm probably gonna cut our first half as its own thing. And this
get the B tier on its own feed. Yeah, exactly.
No, I'm just so I'm gonna do like because our conversation was about Billy Wilder and with Joseph McBride, and then the other one's kind of about Sunset Boulevard as the film. So I feel like
and then we're talking about catnip. That's great.
Yeah, and this is gonna be obviously the catnip bit.
Yeah.
Maybe Joseph McBride has a cat or a dog. I don't know.
Does he have catnip opinions? I don't know. Let's tune in and find out.
Maybe he has a chimp.
I wanted to.
I hope it's a chimp, not a monkey.
I wanted to end with this though because it's amazing, and I watched this on Andy's birthday.
Matter.
I watched this on Andy's birthday with him on a stream, but
you cannot resist a Trump impression. All right, go ahead.
I love just this one guy.
Folks, we love Weird Al. We love Weird Al Yankovic. Weird Al, an American original. He's got more money than sin. More money. He's probably, I don't know, maybe he's got more money than me. I don't know if he's got more money than me, but he's got a lot of it. He's got a lot of spunk and he's got a lot of talent. I've never seen anybody who gets famous playing accordion. I just don't see it. I just don't see it. Who's doing accordion? And we don't even know how it works. Science doesn't even know how it works. He gets the piano and he squeezes it and it sounds really crazy. And Weird Al figured it out. God bless him. We think it's great that Weird Al figured out that accordion. I don't even know how they do. We don't even know how it do. Does it need batteries? We'll never know. We'll never know. And science doesn't know. But Weird Al was very mean to Coolio. Not very nice. Coolio was very upset with Mr. Weird Al. He didn't ask for the rights. He just went and did Amish Paradise, and he just didn't even ask for the rights. He didn't even ask for it. Gangsta's Paradise. He had such a big hit with Gangsta's Paradise. And, with Amish Paradise, what they do is they take the music, and they steal the whole thing. They just steal the music, and they write a new words, and it's a new song, and everyone goes, oh, it's so great how he writes new words to it, and suddenly it's funny. Best comedy album. It'll never get best music. Never get best album. Breakout star. He'll never do it. They'll never get it to him. No CMAs, nothing. But people buy it. They like it because it's a good product. And we love what Weird Al does. Weird Al has originals. Night Santa went crazy. Albuquerque. But they'll never like it as much as White and Nerdy. He was very mean to Mr. Chameleonaire, and we'll never like the originals quite as much as the parodies. We like the parodies so much. He does such a good job with it. Really, really good job. eBay, Backstreet Boys. He did eBay years after we totally forgot. They come out with eBay. And I had totally forgotten who are the Backstreet Boys. I don't even know, but we had an incredible conversation with Lou Pearlman.
Bank Street Boys.
Who are the Backstreet Boys? We don't even know.
I remember Matt Leck watching that the first time I ever saw it on Left Reckoning, and he was like, there's five separate things that he gets right about Trump. Like obviously like the obsession with celebrity, like the weird like nostalgia thing, like the obsession with money. Like there's just like a weird amount of things that he gets right in that video. With
The who is mean to who. He's very mean to him. He was very mean.
Not very nice. Yeah. All right. Well,
that's a good lead-in. It's a good lead-in for your Naked Gun podcast because Weird Al makes a little cameo.
And he makes a pretty at a time when I think his career is really taking off. I want to do a UHF episode one day. Because I remember being
that'd be great. That was big in my personal development.
Yeah.
Yeah, me too.
I think we went home and tried to recreate at least 2 or 3 of those sketches from that with our video camera in the backyard immediately.
Did you throw a cat out of a window?
No, but we did a Conan, the librarian parody. I'm trying to think of what else. A couple other things.
Poodles Forest. You throw poodles out a window.
Yeah.
And then, you know, don't forget Turtles Art Nature suction cups.
Are you doing the Police Story TV show too, or is it just covering the movies?
The Naked Gun. Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I've talked to Natalie Sher about it. It's really hilarious to get her to do it though, because I mean, I guess those are her favorite movies, but she writes such like serious and good articles for Jacobin, like on like, you know, health policy and all that stuff. So it's really funny to have her come on and just talk about The Naked Gun, because there are so many movies in her wheelhouse, I think, that we could talk about that are like serious and like important and all this stuff. And it's just, and I don't, it just ended up with
this is your scheme. Like, show this to this person, like bring this person from this serious thing into this ridiculous pop cultural space, right? That's like,
well, that's Andy's whole thing.
Yeah, that is my thing. Yeah, I'm really excited because I'm going to have Milton Alamati watch Wolf Warrior 2.
Wait, watch which?
Wolf Warrior 2 is a Chinese film about
right, the biggest
Warrior
action movie of all time. Yeah.
It's called Wolf Warrior 2.
This is a good space to be in.
It's the biggest action movie of all time. Did great numbers.
And it's from China.
We don't even know how it works. We don't even. All right. Well, we're at like 3 hours and 0 people watching. I'm gonna cut these into 2 separate.
We did it.
Tomorrow.
We cleared the board.
Yeah.
Only one more hour. Who needs to watch him?
Attica.
All right. Well, this has been Movie Night Extravaganza. Next week we're going to be doing.
Has it really though?
Not for the last hour.
Movie Night Fizzle Out. That's what tonight's show is.
It's been Puppy Night Extravaganza.
Puppy Night Show. Yeah. All right. All good names. Good night, everyone, and good luck.
Thank you.